Halito. My name is Johnny J, and I am very excited to be kicking off Something Else Heritage Month, or as those of us who don't work at CNN like to call it, Native American Heritage Month, by giving you all a warm welcome to the 2021 Natives in Tech Conference, Encoding Native Knowledge. It's an exciting time for Native people in tech, despite the negative ways that we've seen our communities being impacted, from Native artists being kicked off Instagram to the removal of posts referencing the murdered and missing Indigenous women, to other platforms failing to protect Native people from harassment and allowing anti-Native hate speech to flourish. In spite of all the negative, technology has also given us the opportunity to mobilize and to create change on a global scale. It's given us new ways to reclaim, revitalize, and resurrect what colonialism has tried to destroy. As more of our work and livelihoods are ingrained with technology, Natives in Tech are exploring ways to make technology more accessible and creating pathways to remedy the issues that we face to provide a better tomorrow for our future generations. So to get things started, I'd like to introduce you to the wonderful and the brilliant Andrea Delgado Olson.
Pachixis, Tangi Kamu. Thank you, Johnny J, for the opening and the welcome. It is so true. What we are trying to do is be recognized and acknowledged and highlighted for the innovators and technologists that we are. And in this space, that's what we get to do. So with that, I would like to kick us off and do a welcome and introduction and give you a little background about myself as well as the organization Natives in Tech. So I would like to officially welcome you to the 2021 Natives in Tech Conference. My name is Andrea Delgado Olson, and I am the Executive Director. So a little bit about myself. I joined the organization in 2017, technically, upon our inception. If you don't know, Natives in Tech was founded by Adam Brevlow, and it was after an article that was written in celebration of Native American Heritage Month, written by the women of Silicon Valley in a Medium post, highlighting 18 really awesome natives in STEM you should know. And it was a awakening, and Adam the very next day started a workspace and gathered us all and started a collaboration, just a space for us to feel safe and welcome and supportive of one another. So from that moment on, we've grown our membership, we've grown our engagement, and we established our 501c3 nonprofit status in 2019. And Adam and his board of directors and his co-founders have just done an amazing job at laying the foundation for where this organization has the potential to go. And I am grateful for him bringing me on and allowing me to work with him and with the board in leading this organization forward. So a little bit of background, elaborating on when I got started. I officially started in this role as executive director in July of 2021, and it has been an incredible experience. I can't thank Adam and the board enough for allowing me this opportunity and appointing me into this position and having the faith in me to lead this organization. And I started with listening to some of the members, listening to the board of directors with what they see this organization as and where they would like to see it going. So the first few months were just me getting an understanding of what has been built, what technologies we are using, what platforms and tools and resources are available, and how we can use them and leverage them and be supportive of one another in these spaces. So since July, it has been a very short few months, but here's a little bit about what I've been working on here since getting started. And it was really just learning and building an infrastructure. And I'm not talking about the tools and technologies that we're using, because what they have created upon me coming here is just phenomenal. But I'm really working on documentation and documenting processes and the processes for the tools that we use. So the onboarding process is a little bit quicker. So when we do start to grow this organization, there's an easy transition into learning what we use and how we function as an organization. So in addition to that, some of the strategic planning that I've been working on is, what are the goals for the organization? What are our goals for the future? And where do we see natives in tech in a week, a month, 3 to 6 months, and a year, and really long-term thinking, 5 years and beyond. So some of those ideas are being documented right now, run by the board, and some of them are being put into place. So fundraising, we've been doing a lot of grant exploration, partnership introductions, sponsorships, such as sponsorships for this conference, as well as contributions from our members and other organizations in our open collective. Establishing partnerships, a lot of requests come in from organizations wanting to support and wanting to know how they can get involved and what they can do to increase their diversity, equity, and inclusion practices in their organizations. And it's fielding those requests and meeting and having these conversations, seeing if there's an alignment where their goals and outcomes align with ours. We're not going to partner with organizations who are just trying to meet criteria and check a box for diversity. We really want to make sure that there's a sense of belonging and a structure in place to be supportive of natives who are in these tech organizations. So also reaching out to folks and introduce ourselves, who we are, what we do, what our missions and goals are, in order to find alignment with some organizations who are willing to support us and for the foreseeable future. And program development. In those listening sessions with the board and a few other members, what are the needs of our community members? Where do we see potential for program and program development? And what I was working on was a little graph of kind of explaining that. So I'd like to show that to you now as well. So here's what I established from those conversations. And the programs that I'm looking at are centered around professional development, education, consulting, community, and partnership. And a lot of the work in the foundational infrastructure is laying this out and what it would look like in a strategic plan. So getting back to where we are, what are we offering right now? So what we have by means of getting involved and staying connected and sharing experiences with community are, blog posts. We really want to hear from you, what your experiences are, how we can help, how we can support, but really highlighting your accomplishments and what you've been working on in your organization or just in your technical endeavors. These are anecdotal and really inspiring to hear and read and share, and to know that we're not alone in our experiences. I think that's what I found the most helpful is reading about and listening to other people, knowing that I wasn't the only one having to have these difficult conversations at work with people who are using terminology that is just really devastating and triggering. So being a support system, and we really want to keep it uplifting, and inspirational. We really want to inspire the future technologists, not just our youth, but folks like me who are making career changes and looking into getting into tech and what that means and how to navigate it. So your blogs and your stories are inspirational. Another way to get involved would be to submit an idea for a monthly meetup. Not just attend and be an attendee, but to really engage and host and suggest a topic that you would like to hear and learn more about or engage in a conversation about. And here are just some forms to really get those into us so we can start planning for meetups in 2022. So if you're looking for ways to support what we do, the organization as a whole, you can visit our open collective, and there are multiple ways to contribute and support the work. And stay in touch. We have several ways to do that. Through the blog that I mentioned, there are some forum conversations that are going on our website. We have GitHub repos of projects that are being worked on, updating websites, updating projects, through our LinkedIn, talent, Twitter, and YouTube. So please do stay connected. And you can find all of these on our website as well at nativesintech.org. And please, after this conference is over, there's still a chance to go to our YouTube channel and rewatch and share with your network, your community, your friends, your family. So yes, please do share this experience with others and let them know that we're here. So I would like to thank all of our sponsors, our amazing sponsors. Anamiki is our partner sponsor for not only the conference, but for the organization. And Red Hat, they are getting into tech track sponsors, and I would just like to thank them. As well as Hoverbear Consulting Services, not only for the contribution to the sponsorship for the conference, but their hard work in getting this conference to be where it is and what it is today, helping on the back end, helping with logistics, and being a part of that committee. Thank you so very much. And same with Grinding Stone Collective. Your efforts are not unnoticed. I thank you immensely for all the work that you have done up until today, and beyond. So thank you for your help and your contributions to making Natives in Tech Conference successful. And also to our beats composer. So there are some intermission videos that will play, and the music that you hear along with the slides were brought to you by Jesse Dessa. And here's a little bit more about his background and what he does. Thank you, Jesse. And another humongous thank you to Johnny J and being our MC and introducing our speakers, kicking us off today, and you'll hear more from Johnny a little later and throughout the conference. In the Q&A, will be in the chat. So there are many, many ways to engage in the conference. And thank you, Johnny. And last but not least, the speakers. I am so grateful to you all for the hard work that you put into your presentations and sharing your journeys and your knowledge and your experiences to really inspire the attendees and future technologists. I really want to applaud your efforts and congratulate you on all that you have accomplished and everything that you do and continue to do in the space. And with that, I will conclude and just say thank you everyone for being here. I'm so excited. The day has finally come. Our speakers are ready and enjoy the conference. Take care.
Every day is a good day to be Indigenous, but today is an especially good day because I get to introduce you to our keynote speaker, and he is absolutely amazing. His work spans over 130 games, 108 of which have been published commercially. He is considered to be the father of first-person shooters, having led the design and contributed to the programming and audio design of iconic and genre-defining games such as Quake and Doom and Wolfenstein. He is also one of the earliest supporters of esports and a competitive Quake and Doom player. To date, he has co-founded 9 successful gaming companies, and he is considered to be among the world's top game designers. And his products have won well over 100 awards. He is the one and the only John Romero.
Hello, everyone. When I was asked to speak at this event, I asked the organizers what they would like me to talk about. I'm used to being asked to speak about first-person shooters or programming, and especially my time at id Software, but for this talk, the conference organizers wanted to hear something more. They wanted to hear my story, my history in the game industry. There was something more than that, though. Through my story, they wanted to hear the industry story, games story, where we started, where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. Having been in the industry for over 34 years, that's no small amount of ground to cover. I've done a lot of thinking, a lot of looking at my archives, and a lot of talking with friends. Much of the stuff I'm going to talk about today is about my story. And in thinking it through, this retrospective has illuminated a lot of patterns that I hadn't before seen, and patterns I'll share with you in this talk that'll show us not just where we've been, but where we as the game industry are probably going. So for giving me this tremendous opportunity to look back as well as look forward, I'd like to thank you all. And now I'd like to talk with you about a life in games. I grew up in the desert of Tucson, Arizona. I was born a Mexican and a Native American from the Yaqui tribe on one side of my family. My great-great-grandmother was Naztec. On the other side of my family was part Norwegian, and my great-great-grandmother was Cherokee. I grew up near Saint-Nevere de Bac, an old mission that my family went to on Sundays. My uncle was a minister there. My family was very Catholic. I don't normally talk about my upbringing, but I think it formed an important part of who I am and factored into the games that I made. My mother and my father married quite young. While my family is now known for programming and design, it's also known tremendous success in dealing drugs and drinking vast amounts of alcohol. And unfortunately, death. 3 of my family have been shot and killed due to drinking and drugs. My father even held up a Circle K at gunpoint for my diapers. I don't say any of this to disparage them. My family and my culture is why I have a deep appreciation for fun, laughter, and entertainment. For as long as I can remember, everyone in my family barbecued almost every night over mesquite wood that we got from the desert ourselves, telling stories and drinking till midnight when the coals were finally ready to cook over. In saying this about my dad, he was my dad and I loved him very much, and he passed away from alcohol and drug addiction in 2005, on the same day that he was born at age 57. He didn't leave much behind. My mother eloped with my father over her racist father's objections, even though his ancestry had Cherokee blood. I spent my first 8 years growing up in the desert on the south side of Tucson, Arizona, in the Mexican barrio. My family was not at all into games. For entertainment, I played in the dirt, in the desert, with the local animals. If I wanted entertainment, I had to make it out of nothing. But in 1976, a Pong console materialized in my grandmother's house on a black and white TV. It was mesmerizing to see something that I controlled move on the TV screen. And it was the first time I played a video game, and I was 8 years old. In 1976, I discovered pinball in an arcade named Spanky's in Tucson. It was dark, cool, and had about 30 pinball machines in there. Then one day they put this cabinet against the wall opposite the pinball machines. It was big and it was called Dune Buggy. One look inside the cabinet through the glass told me that this was new and amazing. It used a black light and it looked surreal. One look inside the cabinet through the glass told me this was new and amazing. It used a black light and looked surreal. I'd never seen a game look so interesting before. There looked like what appeared to be a ghostly Jeep that I drove around the landscape trying to avoid the car on the road. They used the Pepper's Ghost trick that's used in the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland. At this time, my wandering through the deserts of Tucson came to an end as my parents got divorced. My mom found a new husband after a year or so, and we moved out of Arizona. It was still 1976 when we moved to Rocklin, California, a sleepy suburban town of about 6,000 people. Unbeknownst to me, it was very close to where much of the work in the early game industry would begin. There were some places in Rocklin where arcade games were beginning to appear. All the games were about shooting aliens or asteroids. Space Invaders was a huge game. At this time, the computer game industry was still very early. The first wave of computers were out. The TRS-80, the Commodore PET, and the Apple II. The computer game industry was started on these three computers. They call it the Holy Trinity. But mainly it was the Apple II, which had color graphics, sound, and was the birthplace of many of the genres that games developed along. The Apple II also influenced the next wave of home computers, but they wouldn't come along for a few years. Some of the earliest games on home computers started appearing in the few new software stores in 1977. The earliest games were on cassette tapes before disk drives were available on the Apple II in 1978. However, I was still playing with Tinker Toys, Lincoln Logs, and Erector sets. I had no idea home computers existed. I was just a normal kid going to primary school. I played down by the creek with my brother and my friends like any other normal kid. We played lots of Dungeons and Dragons. We rode our BMX dirt bikes everywhere without helmets. It was a great time I'll never forget. Then, one day in the summer of 1979, my brother and my friend Robert rode to my house on their bikes, excitedly told me that they found a place where we could play games that didn't cost any money. Well, I got on my bike and I followed them immediately. It was about a 45-minute bike ride all the way to Sierra College, the community college in Rocklin. It was the summer of 1979. Outside it was 38 Celsius and few students were on campus. We made it our way to the computer science building where it was a balmy 15 Celsius. In one room they had Burroughs computers and Wang computers. No one was using them for some reason. But in one room where an old mainframe computer was taking up all the space, the room right next to it was filled with about 25 terminals all connected to the mainframe, and this is where a few college students were doing some of their projects. Robert showed me some old university text games like Hunt the Wumpus, Nim, Poison Cookie, and several others. We came back almost every day that summer. It was amazing that none of the students questioned the fact that two 11-year-olds were playing around on the university terminals. Sometimes if the terminals were all filled up, we played games on the teletype machine, which is basically playing a game where every turn is a computer printout on paper of the entire screen. After the glamour of the text games wore off very quickly, I started to pay attention to what the students were doing on the terminals. Robert told me that they were writing programs. I started to ask students what the words meant. I wrote them down, and then I started to experiment with them on my own. Before long, I had an HP Basic manual and started writing my very first adventure game. The summer was over, but my interest in programming computers was piqued. By the summer of 1980, Sierra College opened up a new room and filled it with new Apple II computers. I spent the next couple summers going in and programming them. I was also telling my new stepfather all the cool things I was learning. 1980 is also the year I started spending a ton of time in arcades. Every week, new arcade games were being released. It was a Cambrian explosion of game design. It was really a wonder to behold. I played all the new machines when they came in, but I spent a majority of my time around this game, Pac-Man. The first time I saw Pac-Man was at the Foothills Bowling Center in Auburn, California. It was brand new, it was color, and you did not kill aliens with a ship. You were a yellow mouth chomping dots while 4 colored ghosts chased you around the maze trying to stop you. If you ate a power pill, you could turn the tables on them. It was mind-blowing. The audio was incredible with a background siren that served to keep you alert, in case being chased by 4 ghosts wasn't tense enough. Intermissions with music and humor happened often. It was such a game changer, and for me, it made an immense impact. I saw that games could be about much more than shooting aliens with a rocket ship. More about shooting later. In 1981, I started high school at Roseville High in Roseville, the next town over. In 1982, my parents finally bought an Apple II computer. Long story short, I spent the next 5 years learning how to code and developed dozens of games. I'm not kidding you when I say that I spent every spare hour programming during that time. I loved summertime when there was no school and I could code from 8 a.m. to midnight every day. At the start of 1983, my family moved to England. The industry had partially burned down in 1983 and 84 when the Atari 2600 market crashed. Consoles were dead. Home computer games continued on after several good publishers went down. Of course, the Nintendo saved the console industry in 1985. Did you know that this wasn't even the first console industry crash? There was one in 1977 that was caused by too many Pong clones. During this time, I submitted dozens of my games and utilities to industry magazines and software publishers. I have a stack of rejection notices that remind me of my first taste of failure. In fact, it wasn't just a taste, it was a buffet of failure. It wouldn't be my last. I barely graduated high school, but I learned how to code in 6502 and I wrote 51 games by 1987. I published most of them while in high school and got the cover of a magazine 3 times. By 1987, the game industry had passed its Big Bang phase. Games were still mostly written by indie developers and published by the likes of Sierra, SSI, EA, Origin, and many others. But internal development at publishers had begun as they looked to professionalize their businesses and have total control over the teams making games. But it was the end of the 8-bit era when I got my first industry job at Origin Systems in 1987. Ultima 5, Origin's then current project, would be the last developed on the Apple II platform. After 8 months, I left Origin to co-found my second game company, Inside Out Software. After porting Might and Magic 2 to the Commodore 64, my next project was canceled by the publisher. It was as clear as the Apple II's beep that the 8-bit era's death spiral had begun. I left my second game company and co-founded my third one, Ideas from the Deep, with a friend of mine, just before we landed jobs at Softdisk in Shreveport, Louisiana. It was the end of the 80s. After working so hard during that decade, writing 56 games, everything I had done was finished. The 8-bit market was done. I had to start all over again in 1989 on the PC, a computer that was new to me. At that time, the game industry was undergoing a major switch from 8-bit to 16-bit. All the old platforms were dying as the PC, Super Nintendo, and Genesis were rising. And I wasn't alone in this massive shift in the industry. Thousands of programmers either made the leap to the next generation or they got left behind. Moby Games is populated with the credits of programmers whose work ends in the 80s. So, it's 1989. SimCity was released this year along with Populous and Prince of Persia. These games were the beginning of amazing franchises that would last decades. Yeah, this is my favorite picture. I worked at Softdisk for a year or so before starting a game-only product called Gamer's Edge. I hired John Carmack and Adrian Carmack into the group and we started making games in August 1990. They are not relatives. A lot of things happened in August of 1990. First, Ultima 6 and The Secret of Monkey Island were released. Ultima 6 was the first Ultima developed on the PC, which really signaled the death of the Apple II. Monkey Island was a revolutionary adventure game. They were both amazing games. While beginning to write our first game together, Slordax, Tom Hall would pop in at night and help with levels because he couldn't help it. He was too excited to know that games were being made just a couple offices away. I would take breaks from coding and play Ultima 6 and Monkey Island while looking up to the successes of these games as a goal that I wanted to reach someday, if only the right conditions would present themselves. While making our games at Gamer's Edge, John Carmack discovered the smooth-scrolling tech while reading Michael Abrash's Power Graphics Programming, the graphics book I'd given him. After a huge breakthrough in horizontal scrolling technology, we created a PC version of Super Mario 3's first couple levels complete with enemies, the Tanuki suit, fireballs, and all. Nintendo loved it, but decided against going forward. They wanted to keep their games on their platform. So instead, we decided to create a new game called Commander Keen that would be published by Apogee Software, a shareware game publisher. We had to create 3 games for Keen to be a success, not just one game. Because we needed to do this as fast as possible for Christmas launch, we had to design the game to be an engine that worked on multiple data sets. 3 months and a lot of pizza and Diet Coke later, and we shipped the first Commander Keen trilogy. It was uploaded to the Software Creations BBS in Massachusetts, the biggest gaming BBS in the United States. Now, it's important to note right now that it's the end of 1990. Before starting on Commander Keen, I'd worked for 10 years trying to make the best Apple II games I could, and that 8-bit industry died. Less than 2 years after starting over on the PC, I had made my best game. It was the best game that any of us had made in our careers, and it was the tipping point for us. We were no longer following behind the industry, we were beginning to lead it. As PC Gamer noted in January 2016 in an article titled The 50 Most Important PC Games of All Time, Commander Keen put id Software on the map, and Commander Keen's groundbreaking smooth scrolling on PCs was a revelation in 1990. And it's hard to believe today that the NES was back then capable of things a PC couldn't do. And looking back, I'm humbled to have had a game of mine included in this list for the year 1990 when Secret of Monkey Island was released. We were the only 2 games noted as being important in 1990 by PC Gamer. We quit working at Softdisk after getting our first royalty check. id Software officially started on February 1st of 1991. In May, John decided he wanted to try his hand at making his first 3D maze game. Tom Hall came up with the design for Hover Tank 1. John was really stressed getting the game made in 2 months, but he did get it done on time. In the summer of 1991, we held what I called the id Summer Seminar, and Apogee brought many of their authors over to our lake house. We demonstrated our new Keen engine tech and gave them lectures on how it worked. Some of those authors licensed our engine, and the modern engine licensing biz was born out of that lake house. In September, we moved the company from Shreveport to Madison, Wisconsin. There were only 4 of us, so it was easy to do. The last half of the year, we made another Commander Keen trilogy. And while working on our second Keen trilogy, we decided to make another 3D maze game and call it Catacomb 3D. This time, the walls were texture mapped. It made a huge difference. This was the first nice-looking implementation of texture mapping in a game. The first example was in a 1985 game called Alternate Reality: The City. Just before Christmas of 1991, Keen 4 was uploaded to the Software Creations BBS once again. And during this time, the Super Nintendo was doing phenomenally well. John Carmack and I used to play F-Zero competitively a lot. Super Mario World was another favorite game at the time. We also played a lot of D&D. We began working on the third Commander Keen trilogy titled The Universe is Toast. We made a VGA parallaxing demo to see how it would look. And while making this demo, John, Adrian, and I decided we didn't want to make another Commander Keen game. We wanted to make another 3D maze game better than Catacomb 3D. So I came up with the idea of making Wolfenstein 3D. We spent 4 months creating the shareware episode, and during that 4 months, we moved the company to Mesquite, Texas in March of 1992 because it was too cold in Wisconsin. We finally got id Software its own office. It was a tiny loft apartment in Mesquite, Texas. We all lived in the same complex so we could walk to work. And we uploaded Wolf 3D on May 5th, 1992 at about 3 a.m. using a modem. We uploaded it to the Software Creations BBS as usual. Scott Miller and George Broussard were over at our apartment while we uploaded. We knew it was going to be big. Wolfenstein 3D was released just 6 weeks after Ultima Underworld. 3D gaming was just beginning on the PC, finally. Earlier in January, Dune 2, the prototypical real-time strategy game, was released, and 1992 was shaping up to be a great year for games. At this time, virtual reality was trying to happen. Dactyl Nightmare was the premier VR game and it was very low-res and choppy. An outfit in Kentucky wanted to adapt Wolfenstein 3D to VR tech. Tom Hall flew to their studio and helped them adapt it. It was still the experimental stage of VR, so it didn't go anywhere. Interestingly, there was controversy after Wolfenstein was released, mostly in Germany. You see, a majority of the imagery in Wolf 3D was banned in Germany. The game was immediately put on the banned list and then sold illegally under the counter in stores. Another piece of interesting news with Wolfenstein was that Jewish kids loved playing the game because they felt they were getting revenge for their ancestors who suffered in World War II. Still, another interesting effect of Wolfenstein was a Vietnam War vet getting cured of his nighttime flashbacks. We got a CompuServe message from him and he was so happy to have found the game. PC Gamer's 50 Most Important Games article included Wolfenstein 3D. Along with Ultima Underworld and Dune 2, we were the only 3 games noted as being important in 1992 by PC Gamer. We discovered that pushing technology and using it with great game design was a winning strategy. By the end of 1992, the post-Wolf 3D explosion of popularity made up our minds. Our next game was going to be the most amazing game that we could envision. It would be hard to make, but we wanted to make the best game that we could imagine playing. Even before starting work on the game, we decided on a name, Doom. We knew everything tech-wise that we wanted to put in the game, and like idiot savants, we put out a press release that told the world that Doom was going to herald another technical revolution in PC programming. This is the opening paragraph of the press release. The rest of it describes the game. There's a quote from John Carmack in it that says, "Wolfenstein is primitive compared to Doom. We're doing Doom the right way this time." Another incredibly important paragraph in the Doom press release is this: an open game. When our last hit, Wolfenstein 3D, was released, the public responded with an almost immediate deluge of homebrewed utilities, map editors, sound editors, trainers, etc., all without any help on file formats or game layout from id Software. Doom will be released as an open game. We'll provide file formats and technical notes for anyone who wants them. People will be able to easily write and share anything from their own map editors to communication network drivers. The entire year of 1993 was filled with so much experimentation. Until then, we'd not experimented too much on game development. We just made the game, usually in 2 months. Experimentation happened while we were making the game as fast as we could. So we didn't put a hard deadline on shipping Doom. It's done when it's done was our motto. We knew how to ship games fast. Not having a deadline wasn't going to slow us down. We were driven to ship games. At this point, we knew we were in the lead. There would be no games with newer tech and better design creeping up behind us. We were building something we had never seen before. We started feeling invincible just after Wolf 3D was released. Doom's development reinforced it. The invention of the BSP tree was desperately needed, so Carmack did it based on Bruce Naylor's research. 3D level design needed to be taken to the next level. Up to that point, games in 3D had a lot of limitations, so they didn't look great. Doom changed that. Coming up with the best design took the entire time. We removed several elements that didn't matter. We said goodbye to the concepts of lives and score. We had to create an idea of how the game should feel and reinforce that with visual and audio design. Multiplayer mode with co-op and deathmatch had to be created. There were no PC games available that were multiplayer and fast. Doom's deathmatch mode changed everything. We released Doom on December 10th, 1993, and the world of 1994 was surreal. We were on top of the world. We felt that we had created the greatest game we could imagine, and we felt that the world agreed with us. Coming back to the game industry, another big game in 1993 was Myst, but it seemed that entering 1994, the entire world was Doom crazy. Every issue of most game magazines talked about Doom in one way or another. I had never seen anything like it. We cranked out Doom 2 in 8 months for happy fans and new ones who had heard of the shareware version. I worked with Raven Software to make Heretic and Hexen the medieval shooters. One thing I do regret was not getting a handle on merchandising back then. We had so many characters in our games that we could have turned into t-shirts, plushies, and many other items. Nowadays, there's a lot of places to get really great game merch for all kinds of games. We then spent the next grueling 18 months working on Quake. It was a tough game to make, but after its release, we advanced the first-person shooter again. The game was completely 3D. This is back when there were no GPUs or hardware systems to draw 3D scenes. While working on Quake, we were also working with NVIDIA and other companies to define the future pipelines and feature sets of 3D graphics cards. For the first time, we had internet multiplayer instead of only LAN and modem choices. So back to Quake. Gaming magazines before and after Quake's release were full of articles and commentary on it. And it was recognized by PC Gamer on their top 50 list, just like Wolfenstein 3D and Doom. This time it was for internet multiplayer, full 3D, mouse look as part of 3D FPS gameplay, and having helped to birth Machinima. But Quake is the game that broke the company. I made the decision to leave in January of 1996. It was tremendously difficult to release Quake. After 7 months of crunch mode, I alone uploaded the game to the world on a Saturday. Like a mutual divorce, both sides were ready to split. I left on August 6th. This was also the year of Diablo and Tomb Raider, two hits that continue to live 2 decades later. After leaving id, it was a very challenging and strange time because while I was feeling down about leaving, everything in my life was getting more exciting. After Quake, I left id and founded Ironstorm with my old friend Tom Hall. Within days of leaving, I had several big game publishers wanting to work with me. I had decided to start a new company with Tom Hall 8 months earlier, so I spent several months flying around and talking to publishers to figure out who would be the best for our new company, Ironstorm. During our 5-year run, Ironstorm released a couple of great games. We made 4 games at Ironstorm. My biggest taste of failure was with Daikatana. We released a decent real-time strategy game named Dominion that unfortunately came out the day StarCraft did. Anachronox, Tom Hall's Western version of Final Fantasy, and Deus Ex, Warren Spector and Harvey Smith's mixture of first-person shooter and RPG, with great player choices and multiple narrative paths. Deus Ex, released in 2000, was awarded Game of the Year by several magazines. After Anachronox was released in 2001, IDOS shut down Ironstorm's Dallas office. Tom and I had to figure out what we were going to do next. We decided to co-found a new company to pursue the new mobile and wireless gaming space. We called the company Monkeystone Games. This was 5 years before the iPhone was released upon the world. The tech back then was a real hassle to program because there were so many different phones and making one work on multiple platforms was a lot of work. Soon enough, Jamdat was acquired by EA for $650 million. The mobile industry was beginning to explode. Games rapidly went from WAP to J2ME to Brew. But the real explosion would happen 5 years later in 2006 with the introduction of the iPhone. We kept Monkeystone running for 5 years, and we had a lot of fun with it. But World of Warcraft had come out in late 2004 and was quickly dominating the MMORPG space. I played Ultima Online when it came out, and I saw the insanity of EverQuest hit everyone around me, but until World of Warcraft, I didn't see the hook. In 2005, I co-founded an MMORPG company so I could make a big MMO for kids with stealth math learning in it. We eventually decided to call this company Gazillion Entertainment. I learned a lot developing a game this big with an internal team of 100. MMOs are hard to launch. After 4 years, we had to stop development due to a major limitation of the tech that we had licensed. We had to lay off most of the team, another big failure. I spent 10 months not working on anything. I was watching the rise of Facebook casual gaming, and I thought it would be an important market to get into. I tried to convince Gazillion to enter the space, but eventually the board of directors decided to stay focused on the MMO market. So I left Gazillion to do some consulting with a small social apps company in San Francisco. After working for less than 3 months, I had shipped my first Facebook game with a small team of 12. The game was called Ravenwood Fair and had astounding success immediately. Within 6 months, the game was being played by 25 million players per month. I put the skeleton of Frontier Jack from Zynga's Frontierville game in the dirt on the loading screen. I learned a lot about microtransactions, monetization models, and what makes people want to spend money. And because of the success of Ravenwood, I co-founded a social game company with my wife Brenda. We named the company Loot Drop. In no time at all, we had 4 games signed up by 4 publishers and hired 40 people to fill the teams. Eventually, after a few years, the social game bubble burst and we put Loot Drop on ice. Then we decided to move to Ireland and start Romero Games on the west coast in Galway. We've been going for 6 years now as indies. Now, before I move into the future, I want to talk about some patterns I've seen in the industry since the beginning. Who here uses Steam to download games? Well, the only difference between using Steam and downloading games from a BBS in the old days is that the speed has gone way up. We've repeated the pattern of digital distribution from the 80s into a faster, sleeker model. Another interesting note is that the RPG company I used to work for, Origin Systems, was bought by EA in 1993 and eventually shut down in 2004. EA is now using that name for their own digital download storefront that competes with Steam, so it looks like the origin cycle is repeating in a different manifestation. The next pattern is multiplayer gaming. When computers entered the home, games became overwhelmingly single-player. For as long as people have played games, they have been mostly multiplayer. Chess, checkers, pretty much all board games, card games, etc. Baseball, basketball, football, games have always been multiplayer. But now, with the new home computer, they're single-player. Doom came at the right time when local area networking was emerging and modems were everywhere. Doom broke the single-player spell of the previous 20 years since the start of the computer game industry. The next pattern is esports, which depends on multiplayer having been popularized. Following the release of Doom, LAN parties became popular. People began lugging their huge CRT monitors and huge towers to their friends' houses for a weekend of deathmatch. After Quake in 1996, team-based deathmatch tournaments got big. Clans formed and real competition began with cash prizes. Several leagues sprung into existence. The number of people attending CPL events were in excess of 5,000. Most of these people brought their own computers to the events. Quake was the prime game used in esports for years, then it shifted to Counter-Strike. This is a recent League of Legends tournament. And guess what? Esports started in the 80s with the arcade boom. There were arcade tournaments for several years with cash prizes given away to the big winners. If you've heard of the movie King of Kong, you might remember that a couple of main players met at a 1982 arcade tournament. Tournaments were happening everywhere back then. The official scores were kept on the Twin Galaxies website, and they still are. The next pattern is story in games. Games that were mainly stories were called adventure games. They always had puzzle elements in them. Recently, the question of what is a game has surfaced. Computer games are not games, according to people who played D&D and board games back in the 70s. Console games are not games, according to computer game players of the 80s. There was a huge issue when the C was dropped from the Computer Game Developers Conference and it became the GDC in 1999 to include all platforms, not just computers. As we expand the boundary of games, people question whether it's a game at all. Is Gone Home a game? Is Life is Strange a game? Is Her Story a game? Yes, I think they are. When we push the boundary of games, when we experiment with the medium to see what it can do, there are always those who will question if this new work at the edge is actually still within the boundary when it has, in fact, just pushed it. The next pattern is violence in games. Games are only the latest form of media to be blamed for violence. Comic books and heavy metal and many others were attacked before video games were. While games were entertainment, they were also very much about war and conflict practice. Chess, for instance, and war games arose from those games. Governments have been investing in game-like technology for over 40 years. Dungeons & Dragons spawned its own outcry. Death Race 2000 heralded the loudest outcry in the 70s, but it was followed by Mortal Kombat, Night Trap, and of course my own games. In a case of incredible timing, the day after the congressional hearings on video game violence, we released Doom on December 10, 1993. I believe games, however, are cultural, and I believe the violence that we see in the world goes beyond games. Plenty of countries play games. Canada, Germany, Japan, England, they are all hardcore consumers of games, yet we don't see similar outbreaks of violence in these countries. It's not the game, it's the gun. It's not the computer, it's the culture. It's not the player. Let me change my last topic. Where are we going as an industry? Well, there's currently high interest and investment in AR and VR technologies. Everyone's trying to find a new way to see games and play games. At some point, VR will be marketed as another console, which it is. Are you playing a game on Xbox, PS5, Switch, or Quest? Augmented reality has immediate and wide-ranging applications if seen through your phone's camera. Mobile gaming gets more incredible every year. There's constant experimentation with how 3D games can be best played on a smartphone. And games are getting more social, which is where they really find huge success. Combine new technologies and new design together, and you know what can happen. Procedural generation is going to reach a more impressive level as programmers and designers apply and discover more advanced techniques, such as machine learning, and procedural generation will be moving over to GPUs to generate all the objects you see in a game, even terrain. Procedural synthesis might be implemented in popular engines as plugins, much the way SpeedTree handles foliage generation. Procedural synthesis algorithmically generates textures. Soon, all our games' graphics will be described by formulas. This technique has been used since the early 80s on the Commodore 64, Atari 800, and later computers for demo scene entries. I still believe that games have to have great design to be successful. Tech by itself is not enough, but great tech combined with great design is a huge win. What does all this great technology and design mean? It means what it's always meant. We're going to continue to have even more amazing games. Thank you.
Welcome back. I hope you are all enjoying yourselves, and I hope that your mind wasn't too blown away by John and Rail's amazing presentation, because coming up next, we have Kari No, who is going to be discussing her experience in building an emerging media lab. And this is one conversation that you do not want to miss. So without further ado, let's get it started.
Aloha mai kako. I'm Kari Noi. I am currently a graduate student at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and today I'm going to be giving a talk that's a little bit more informal in the sense that I'm going to be telling a story more so than reporting on typically what I do in presentations for reporting on any kind of research findings or anything like that. So I hope you guys are interested in listening to how we built CreateX. Now, to give a little bit more context to myself, I already introduced myself. I am Kari. I am not only a grad student, so in particular a PhD student in computer science at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I'm also a graduate research assistant at the Laboratory for Advanced Visualization Applications, LAVA is what we call it. And there, I've been working there since I was an undergraduate student. I completed my master's just this past earlier this year, and I've moved on to my PhD. And throughout my entire time working at Lava, I've done a lot of projects dealing with doing or creating interactive experiences. I think a better term to put it is serious games. So that is a lot of times these interactions or experiences that are not necessarily there for entertainment, but there for training or for education. And it's been a whole lot of fun. I also have to I'm a big nerd, and so what I do for my job is also what I do in my free time as well. And I like to try to create different systems, particularly for the preservation and the perpetuation of Hawaiian culture. So I'm going to be talking a lot about that, particularly for this talk. I'm going to be talking about Valkyrie, which is the first project of CreateX, and important to understand sort of the pathway we went on to create CreateX. So, what is CreateX exactly? So I already mentioned it's an emerging media lab, but CreateX is a new, we always call it a sister lab to Lava, and it is at the University of Hawaii at West Oahu. So it's a little bit of a ways. It's I have to drive a little bit far to get to it than I'm used to. But it is in the new Academy of Creative Media building that was just constructed and opened up earlier this year. And within that space, we decided to create a projection system or to set up a projection system. So what I'm going to be telling you is the story of how we created that or why we created that projector system, how we set it up, and then how we went about creating Valkyrie, which was the first program we created for the system. And then I'm going to end it and wrap it all up with what our hopes for the future are and our projects that we have on the horizon. So if that is all interesting to you, I will continue on. So, what exactly am I referring to when I say a projection space? I'm talking about a mixed reality projection space. Now, when we say mixed reality, or I talk about extended realities, just in case anyone doesn't know the meaning of that or what I'm referring to, is that extended reality technologies encompass virtual reality, uh, augmented reality, and mixed reality, which augmented and mixed reality kind of go hand in hand. There's a little bit of difference, but essentially virtual reality is what you can think of when you think of headsets. You have a head-mounted display and you're fully immersed, at least visually, in a digital environment, while mixed and augmented realities are you're mixed or you're augmenting reality in some way using some kind of digital component. And so for our projection space, what we are doing is that we're projecting onto the walls and we're hoping to project onto the floor soon. We're still getting that all sorted and trying to find funding for that. But to project into a space to create a virtual environment so that users can do a multitude of things. So we are not just framing this for, say, artistic or exhibition purposes. This also, we really want to use the space for education and research. So it's in the Academy of Creative Media building. So we are really looking into how we can provide access to the students so they can go in and they can use it as a ground and a foundation to start utilizing the system in ways that will benefit what the stories and narratives they wanted to say. As if you ask Chris Lee about this space, Chris Lee is the head of the Academy of Creative Media system-wide at the University of Hawaii, and who helped develop this lab. He sees this sort of mixed reality projection spaces, which you start to see in different museums and art galleries, as the future of storytelling. Essentially, through this immersion and through this sense of place that you get from being in these immersive projection systems, it's a new way for us to think about how we express ourselves artistically, how do we express narratives through the capabilities of these spaces. And that is really cool. It sounds like I'm going to say but no. It's very awesome. I'm very excited for students, for what students are going to come up with and tell the stories they're going to tell in these spaces. But we also are looking into and doing research because since this is a sister lab to Lava, we are also looking into doing research in how these spaces can aid in more research or education focused projects, such as for data visualization, or even for educational environments for possibly school children. So overall, we have high hopes for what this room can be and or what the system can be. And not only is it just projectors, we also are experimenting with and adding different peripherals to the system. So like right now, what I've been doing, and it's been kind of silly because I constantly have to dance in front of a camera essentially, is that we are implementing Azure Connects uh, into the system. And with that, we can have body tracking. So not only will it be immersive because it's just the the visual of being surrounded within the system, but also it will be interactive by having by the system being able to know where you are in the room, and from there be able to generate different visuals or sound cues or what have you, depending on where you are in the room. So that's a very exciting part, and I've been having a lot of fun developing that. But it's still too early, so I don't have a complete demo to show you all yet, but I'm working towards it. So that's essentially the rundown of what CreateX is, other than, or at least the projector system in CreateX. We are also hoping that CreateX houses other interesting technology systems that could aid in, again, these goals of for artistic expression, for education, for research, and so on and so forth. So what I'm going to talk about now in particular is Valky, which is our first project. So where this really all started was actually from when Chris Lee and Jason Lee. So Jason Lee is the director of Lava. He's my boss. During some of their trips around, particularly to Japan, they visited Team Lab Borderless. Now, I have some video of when I got sent there because shortly after they came back, they were very interested in implementing this kind of system in the Academy of Creative Media. And so they sent me to Japan to go and be like, figure out how this works so we can build it here. And so I had a fun time where I spent hours in Team Lab Borderless, kind of really trying to take it all in, all their exhibits, the layout, how they designed the space for so that people, visitors, could go in, and how they really directed people to go to space to space to space, which honestly it's undirected. That's the whole reason why it's called Borderless, is because all of the art, it was very interesting, all of the art kind of goes into one another, and it is the fun of it is not only that the art is just very exciting, and I mean, look at this, everyone was there trying to take a good picture for Instagram, but it was very interesting to see how they use the technology to create these spaces, augmented spaces that go from room to room to room to interesting topic, where the real fun of it was exploring and stumbling upon new things that were interesting and just sometimes just really awe-inspiring. So after that really cool trip, I also visited Team Lab Planets, but I didn't have as much video from there because there was a lot of water. Like they actually made you walk through water, and that I didn't want to get my camera wet, so I didn't take as much video of that. But that was also a very cool digital art museum. So with all of this ideas in mind, we started to think about, and I already kind of clued you into what we started to think about is as we reflected on our experiences at Team Lab and their digital art museums, what sort of what did we want to do? What sort of opportunities that we had to do something to implement a system, a similar system, or something a bit different? And so this was in line with the building of the Academy of Creative Media, and so it was decided, oh, what we want to focus on is the projection system and try to get the projection system in there so we can really think about if you had this augmented space at your disposal, excuse me, at your disposal, what could you do in it? Now, Lava already has a history of these kinds of spaces or similar sorts of spaces. Before Jason actually started working at the University of Hawaii, he worked at the EVL lab at the University of Chicago, and they did a lot of projects like developing the Cave 2. So they're called cave systems where they use projectors or moving on to displays to create these immersive rooms. But what we thought was particularly interesting and what we're reflecting on from even our time at Lava, where some of the Lava grads not that long ago, maybe a couple years back, or actually, is it several years back? I'm getting old. Anyway, several years back, created the Destiny Cyber Canoe, was that there of course are a lot of pros to creating a display immersive environment, but there are cons as well. One of the things that we found is Destiny was amazing to look at. It's 3D capable. You really feel immersed in the environment, but it comes with some problems of installing and just upkeep of the displays. The displays had to be custom made, so they're a bit expensive. So we were seeing, okay, if we made something that's a little bit cheaper or like more, I wouldn't say low tech, but easily more deployable, that it could be deployed into different environments more easier than a big display room, and that it still is different from trying to do like a virtual reality environment or augmented reality environment because people tend to, I mean, okay, again, don't get me wrong, I love virtual reality and augmented reality, but like wearing those headsets, we find that a lot of people get exhausted or can't even see because their vision isn't perfect. Um, so we want to explore this avenue that is kind of solving some of the other problems we're seeing with head-mounted displays and with these more expensive display walls. So the quality of projector systems is lower. Like you're not going to get the same clarity as having an OLED display as your display walls, or literally having a VR headset like inches from your eyes. However, we thought it would be very interesting to look into, okay, this is a space everyone can be in, feel embodied in. What can we do together and what can we experience together in this projection system that could better practices of education, better practices of data visualization, or again, like I said this earlier, better or give opportunity to different ways of expressing ourselves artistically. So, with that in mind, we created CreateX. And since CreateX was being built, the first challenge was building the projector system. And so from there, once we understood the direction we wanted to go in building the projector system, the next thing we had to consider is what we wanted to build for the system as its first project. So this would be a demonstration of the capabilities of the projection system. And now this raised a cool opportunity because often when we work, we have we have very specific requirements for the kind of software we have to build. But in this case, the more important part was building the hardware and building the system. So the software part could potentially be about or test anything we really wanted. And so we right away knew that we wanted to do something that incorporated Hawaiian culture. And we wanted to do this for a couple of reasons. The first is we were inspired by Team Lab and Team Lab's exhibition. Not all of them, but a lot of them utilized and incorporated Japanese culture into its aesthetic, into its meanings of the art, and so on and so forth. So we wanted to have and take the chance to think through how that would look from a Hawaiian perspective. And secondly, because I was the lead on the project and because of my own experience and my own work, I thought it was a very good idea to take that this would allow me to take the time to really think through the process of creating these sorts of interactive experiences, because often I think developers know that sometimes the development cycle goes so fast and some things get lost, or you don't have the time or the luxury to dwell on the deeper meanings or embedding deeper knowledges into these kinds of interactives. So I felt this was a good opportunity to really try to figure out a good process so that in the future, when we are doing projects that we're really on, like, we gotta go mode, we have already kind of a method to help us go through so we don't lose a lot or I guess you could say forget, but so that we make sure that we're on task to both developing cool technology, but also that we're doing it in a way that's equitable to our communities. Because I'll go into, and I'll actually have a couple of excerpts to share from different books that I think is kind of interesting, that goes and really critiques the and gets you an understanding of, for museum exhibitions, why they were harmful. And I think most of us know why museums could potentially be harmful, just because of their history of being European, or even just like a colonial construct of, hey, we are presenting the other. They often objectified indigenous peoples. And so in this day and age, there's a large push to figure out how do we, basically, how do museums not do that? So the first quote I want to share actually is from this book called Ethnographic Museums Through Oceanic Lens, or Refocusing Ethnographic Museums Through Oceanic Lenses. I cannot show it to you because, there we go. It's very interesting. In the first chapter, it talks about Bishop Museum, and particularly I wanted to read a passage from, which was a quote by Murkhanale Marzan, and I'm sorry if I pronounced the name wrong, or his name wrong, because I'm not very sure how to pronounce French names. But he was a cultural resource specialist at the Bishop Museum, and he is quoted saying, "Anthropologists were just more concerned about the research and preservation, but not really interested in the continual perpetuation of those cultures through the interactions with the living people in the community. We're, which he's talking about Bishop Museum, looking at it from a different lens. We're looking at how those things of the past are still connected to the people of the present, and how those things can help us continue into the future. In Europe, a lot of the collections or the researchers are separated from the collections. They don't interact with the collections in the same way. I think that's, for me, the magic for me being here at the museum, is because I am a practitioner of different art forms and understand the different cultural perspectives that were imbued in all of these things that we hold here at the museum. It only allows the museum to access that through me and people like me, so that information can be disseminated in a very positive and proactive way." So this is speaking to, as I said, the problem with museums, in which it tends to be disconnected, and a lot of the artifacts are just that. They're artifacts, they're objects, they're separated from the contexts and the connections they had with the community. And particularly for extended reality technologies, even though often we don't deal with the actual artifacts, there's still a risk of objectification of the cultures or the artifacts, or the that are being exhibited. So the other quote that I typically share, that kind of, for people who are much more eloquent than me, describes these sorts of problems and these things we need to consider, is this is a quote from Decolonizing Methodologies by Dr. Linda Tuhiwai-Smith. And in this quote, she writes about the different ways to be researched or colonized, and she actually has a bullet point talking about virtual reality. And in the quote, it says, "For those who can afford it, virtual reality can already substitute for exotic travel and armchair voyeurism. Art collections from museums can now be viewed from anywhere in the world, and ancient ruins can be reconstructed and entered by a tourist who never needs to leave home. According to Tasmanian Aborigine Jimmy Everett, white people actually farm Aboriginal culture, molding it into static stereotyped images of what is accepted by white Australians as being Aboriginal. Anything that doesn't fit the white criteria is rejected on the presumption that it is not wholly Aboriginal. Scientific knowledge of peoples can be created for virtual experience, and conversations can be designed between ancient warriors and modern day observers. Cultural differences can be controlled by selecting and pushing buttons. Dehumanization of the other continues." So, thinking about these quotes and thinking about how there are the problems with, again, objectification and just being othered and losing all these connections and embedded knowledges when presenting cultural heritage knowledge or artifacts. This really prompted me to really think through and try to make sure that as we're establishing CreateX, we, as I already said, have a method so that we can be mindful of these critiques, be mindful of these risks and these habits, essentially, because it's what we know. So even with that quote from Dr. Smith, talking about, or actually it was she quoted Jimmy Everett, thinking about just being able to talk to ancient warriors or being able to experience something from the past. We have a habit of immediately when we think of these technologies, maybe that's one of the first ideas that we have, but we really have to think deeper than just like a shallow breadth of presentation of culture. So with that, that actually led to my thesis, where I started trying to think through how this framework would be created. So as you had the opportunity to have this about Hawaiian culture and trying to think of, okay, what are we going to do? A couple questions really came up, and that is, who are we optimizing for when we create cultural heritage exhibitions? And how can these sorts of exhibitions benefit the community of the cultural heritage? Essentially addressing this very obvious problem in exhibition design, in just the coordination of like the development and design of exhibitions in museum like settings or just exhibition settings, is that how do you do it so it's not objectifying, that it's actually something that is useful to the community that is being exhibited, and also what kind of responsibilities do you have on that? Because we can go more in on the details of, oh, what is, I guess the term we can say in this sense is, what is free to share, what information is free to share, what information shouldn't be shared in these kinds of contexts. And it goes into a conversation about data sovereignty. And that is a much more complex conversation that I'm going to, just as I did now, briefly touch upon, because I don't think you guys want a huge lecture like that. However, we were really conscious of like, okay, we want to create something that's not just, oh, we want our first demo to be Hawaiian and it's just cool because it's Hawaiian, and there's no depth there. And so we really started thinking through these questions, and that actually led me to my thesis topic, which was trying to come up with a framework to really think through these questions and or these considerations, and how do you go about your usual design process as a software developer, but take time to think of these considerations. So I'm not going to explain my whole thesis and its methodology and its whole thing in detail. Essentially, it was literature review, and then I interviewed Native Hawaiian professionals to gauge what they thought was equitable in exhibition and extended reality design, so interactive design essentially. And so what the results were we could explicitly define what is considered equitable and valuable to communities through exhibitions. Now, for this audience, I think this is going to be very apparent, and like, yeah, that was the result. But I still think it was very important to have these explicit uh, goals or like explicit considerations to have, so that when we go and we expand and we start working on more projects like this, we can explain to future students how exactly to go about reflecting, considering, and making connections with the community. So to list off these points is that first is recognition and respect for ancestral knowledge and lineages that created and passed down that knowledge. So don't separate the whatever cool thing that you think you think that you want to present in a cultural heritage exhibition or an interactive. Don't just focus on that. Make sure to have don't disconnect it from the context or the communities that created it, because if you're doing that, that's very harmful to how people engage with and those who are not familiar learn through that sort of ripping it from the community. Second, recognition, respect for ancestral science and their methods that created and validated that knowledge. This is a huge topic in the sense that a lot of, especially indigenous cultures, have their own methods and ways of knowing things and validating how they know things, and that's their own sciences. And so we cannot, especially for us, or I say us in the sense that those of us who have a university education, in which the university education teaches us more Western ways of validating knowledge, we cannot look at other indigenous or other scientific ways of knowing and methods of knowing and think that they're invalid or do not take them into consideration at all of how this knowledge came to be. Thirdly, authority over presentation, expression, and design of the exhibition, so community-led co-design. So there are a lot of different methods that museums are using or trying to figure out how to use, or even just anyone who is working in the cultural heritage field, because there's the thought of if something is created by someone not from the community or of the culture, then that already is a road to being harmful, because they don't have the context, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the experience to create something that will have the complexity and depth that is needed for these interactives to not be harmful. And so the thought is, and this is called different things and they're all a little bit different, but the method is that professionals such as curators, exhibit designers, even in my context, myself as an extended reality technology designer, work as a supporter, and it's led by the community. So instead of me doing what I want to do and leading that, we are basically supporting community members who will design the project to what they think is equitable and good for their community. And there's a lot of critique to this kind of methodology. The first being, or the number one being, that this is a very slow process. Because there's always going to be the overhead of having these conversations, because as the professionals need to make sure they gauge expectations of the community, and the community are probably will often suggest things that might go against the expert's typical way or typical comfort of doing things. The other critique is that also there's still the question of, even if you're from the community, or it is led by the community and you're from the community, who from the community actually is the one who should tell the story, and that's hard to define most of the time. Okay, the next one is opportunity to educate and give experience to community members and skills relevant to the creation of the exhibition. This one's very easy. It's just meaning that as you go through the process of creating an interactive or creating an exhibition, don't just go there, extract everything, and leave. Also give knowledge of your expertise, have the opportunity so that local community members can gain a skill. And so there is a lasting positive impression from not just the product of the interactive design, but just the process also is very helpful as well. And then lastly, the authority over how, when, where an exhibition and its data will be presented, distributed, stored, and utilized in the future. This is also talking about data sovereignty. This is talking about, again, not being extractive in your process and distribution of whatever the resulting interaction is, in the way that all the things that you collected, like the media, the research, the information, is not just held by, say, for me, like my positionalities, I'm an employee at the University of Hawaii. I want to make sure that it's not just the University of Hawaii owns it, takes it, and then does not allow it to be freely given back to the community who generated it. It should be shared by, should be shared to the community who created it, because essentially it is their knowledge and their experiences and their life. So it's very important to think more like that, and not think in the sense that you are just going there, recording, going back, and you'll never go back to the community again. So with all that being said, very quickly to show. Just to explicitly state, this is the framework, or at least this is my image that I created the framework. Very simply, there's a very basic software development cycle timeline on there, where usually the steps are requirements, design, prototyping, testing, and a loop between those phases in software development design. And I positioned waypoints, essentially places during your design process where you should stop and consider and reflect on how your project is going. Are you answering these questions and considerations that you need to think about to make sure that you are having, and you are not, you are meeting the equitable standards of doing your project. So like when you're collecting requirements, do you understand your positionality? Are you actually involving people from the community in the project? Are you such and such and such? So particularly for Valkyrie, I know I went on a long tangent about museum creation, exhibit design, but it all goes back to, for Valkyrie, we started to really think like, okay, how are we going to do this correctly? And so we did in that time make a prototype, and then I went out and I interviewed a lot of different Hawaiian professionals, both artists, educators, and so on. And from there, started to understand sort of how to answer these questions posited from the waypoints that I came up with, like how can exhibits be equitable? And from there, we went through and we changed features that were involved in the creation of Valkyrie. So this was a doc we had that where we would put the initial features, and then we would say, okay, did the project change? Or did the feature change, and if so, why? What was the evidence from the interviews that caused us to change this feature? So I'm going to go over that a little bit. But before I can really talk about the features, you need to know how Valkyrie essentially works. So Valkyrie was created with the initial idea that the more you use Aloha Hawaii, the more diverse and abundant the forest will become that is surrounding you through the projection system. Now, that was the initial idea. And then from there, it grew to trying to think of, okay, what opportunities do we have from creating something with that sort of metaphor? So what Valkyrie ended up being is that it was a touch table interface that the user could go up to, and on that interface, they're presented with a board, a tile board, and on this board they can request for different tiles to appear, and each of these tiles have a different Hawaiian word on it. And when they go and they bring this tile to a specific placement that they can do by matching the colors on the tile, whatever tile it is would affect the little character that's on the screen. So essentially, red tiles are like subjects, or they can be like elements. particularly for this, an EEV, or it says EEV, is a type of bird. So when you move it to the red tile space, the little character turns into an EEV bird. But now we can modify it by adding another tile. So the green tile, or I should say teal tile, when you move it to its space, say we do lele, you can see that the bird starts to fly. And that's because lilik EV essentially means that the bird is flying. So it's this sort of, the idea came from visual programming in the sense that we didn't want to have any English there, but we still wanted to do that same idea, remember from the Team Lab exhibit, where through the experience of seeing what happened when you interact with the words, with the vocabulary, that's how you build your understanding of what the vocabulary means. And also through this kind of interface that we created, it kind of introduces the concepts of visual programming, because you're effectively programming little element to go into the environment. So in this case, the EV bird. So you can go on, add into the other modifiers, or the other tile modifiers. So we can say that the EV is fast, the EV is sad, or something like that. And once you have your character created, you can go and you can send them off, and they will go into the virtual forest, and they will continue to do whatever action you told them to, whether it's flying, walking, singing, and so on and so forth. There are other particular things. So as I said before, when we were going through that list of what were the base features and what were changed, the interface changed because actually we were going to use English at first. We wanted to just create a sentence, and I would explain to you, this is what it's in English, this is what it means, and so on and so forth. But we found that was really catering to people who don't know a little Hawaii, and still yet the system does still cater to someone who doesn't have an expertise, because if you know a little Hawaii, this is very easy to use. It's going to feel like a children's toy probably, but we're not putting English in the forefront. You have to actually work for gaining the knowledge in the system. It's not just going to be handed to you easily. You have to really think in terms of Hawaiian words and the particular possible meanings in that way. So for that's why we changed to our current system after that feedback. And then there's also the thought of how we used to present the environment before. The older versions had fictional settings, which looked very nice, but they could just have been anywhere, essentially. And so it's like a generic Hawaiian forest. And so what changed is that we started to think about, okay, what if we actually modeled it after places? Essentially, for our most recent demo of Auki'i, it's Wainiha Valley on Kauai, which is one of my favorite places on Kauai. That's, I guess, to be in the first prototype. But essentially, we can add in another layer of knowledge by making it a real place, because then we can also have limitations and the opportunity to have the elements that appear, such as the endemic species that appear or that you can program, be from that place, so that you know that in Wainiha Valley there is this sort of bird. It's like how we can, I want to do extinct birds as well. So we can put the Kauai'o'o in a place, but then say if we change the environment to somewhere like on the Big Island, we would have the Hawaii'o'o, so like the different sorts of birds that were around the island. Now, I'm sticking to birds because that is mostly what we have implemented, is the systems prepared or ready to do endemic species, mostly birds and other mammals, or there's not much mammals. I'm also going to put pua'a in there because they've just been around for longer, so even though they're not completely endemic. Anyway, we can have bats though. Bats are going to be the endemic mammal. we also want to add in other elements. Not is it just fauna, but it also can be flora. That is, the user can program it so that it starts growing endemic plant species in the area that are particular to that area, and also being able to program weather elements so that are particular to that area, so they can also learn the names or the types of, because there's a lot of terminology like that in Hawaiian, of that into the scene, and so they can start to develop this familiarity. It's not as going to be as good as actually being there, of course, because you can't beat that. But we see opportunities for this for, say, school groups who can't go to the other islands, but it's important to learn the histories and to be familiar with all of the islands, but you never have a chance to go. Like, I didn't get to go to Maui and the Big Island until I was much older because I'm from Kauai, so I was kind of stuck on that side. And then the cool thing was to go to Oahu every once a year. So in that sense, is that there's a lot of things that students should learn about their home. And I say this and in my mind I'm thinking of Hawaiian students when I say this. Um, but they not always are going to be able to get there. So through this, we can offer and have them experience something that still is not perfect, but at least it's a little bit more of an experience and an impact than just reading a book or watching a television or something like that. So that kind of goes into the future features of what we're hoping for Valkyrie. Valkyrie is a bit on the back burner at the moment because we just passed our 1 year anniversary of moving into CrateX. And so we have been working a lot also on writing grants and basically forging working relationships with different organizations and different partners to create opportunity for more projects so that more students can come in and help and develop these a wider range of projects. So, for example, we've been working with PVS on the third VA'a, which is changing and developing as everyone is trying to think and really reflect on what the third VA'a can be. But essentially, our part in it is that we're developing a virtual space, so a virtual environment in which that essentially users can go on adventures with a little character named Kakuhi, and through their adventures, they can learn about the different science that the Polynesian Voyaging Society conducts, especially from the data they collect when they go on their voyages. Particularly, PVS is planning to go on a Pacific voyage soon, so we're getting ready to figure out what kind of data we can collect from that and what can we share with, and what kind of adventures we can develop for the community. We're also working with the Office of Indigenous Innovation which is a UH system-wide office, on looking into other projects that we can work on, and actually even thinking about how we can expand these projector systems to other places so that we can create more labs, not only in universities, but even maybe in high schools or community areas, so that more local students can have access to these kinds of technologies. So, with all that said, we had a lot of fun building CrateX, dreaming about CrateX, and designing and what we really want to become as a lab as we start the process of like actually establishing ourselves. And we're very hopeful for the future. You know, COVID has caused a lot of problems for everyone in so many different ways, but we are very looking forward to trying to, once COVID is finally passed, to opening our doors and allowing students to, and community members as well, to come in and really see what they can create with this tech available. So, mahalo so much for listening. I hope that what I said in the story that I shared of CrateX to Valkyrie to our hopes and dreams for the space was interesting to you all. And I'm just very thankful that I had the opportunity to speak and share this story with all of you. So, mahalo.
So far, you've heard from the legendary John Romero and the brilliant Carino as they discuss game development and the paths that they have taken in their careers. But we're still just getting started. Coming up next, we have Dakota Lightning, Nicole Archibald, Laura Denson, Natalie Isabel Contreras, and Mani Gar, all rockstar natives in tech who have broken down so many barriers to open the doors for those that follow. So stay tuned in for all the Indigenous brilliance headed your way.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to my talk, The Power of Programmatic Problem Solving. I hope that you're enjoying the Natives in Tech conference so far. It's been really enlightening for me seeing so many different perspectives and experiences and shared and different. So I'm really happy to be here. Plus, they're talking about one of my favorite topics, which is tech. And I'm going to start out by introducing myself, and then we'll get on to the good stuff. So I'm Nicole Archambault, and I am a front-end web developer, and I'm also a self-taught front-end web developer. Some of you might know me from my kind of weird but endearing Twitter presence, and I create and share a lot of stuff for new coders. And I'm also the creator of Live Code, which is my little brand dedicated to the experience of the self-taught coder. Somebody who takes the non-traditional route to the web development industry, just like I did and just like you might be doing right now. And I'm in the process of launching my learning community for self-taught coders, Launchpad, this year, actually this fall, very shortly. And it's a place really for everybody to come together and get all of their needs as self-taught coders all in one place. So the courses, the community, and the coaching, and the three things that I really believe that new coders need the most, all in one place. So. And I'm also the host of the Live Code podcast. I've been doing that for many years, although it's been a bit since I posted. And there are some great episodes in there. If you haven't seen it, it's on YouTube, or I'm sorry, it's on iTunes and Spotify. I'm also a Free Code Camp top contributor and a Treehouse success story, which I will be talking about a little bit later as it pertains to my story. But first and foremost, I'm dedicated to people that are in the same boat that I was in. And, I wasn't even in that boat very long ago, being a new coder. And in a lot of ways, I still consider myself to be a new coder. I'm certainly no expert. But my specialization also that I found within the tech industry is somewhere in between educational technology, so education, technology, and also psychology, because there's a whole lot of psychology behind everything that we do in this industry. But I love learning to code online, and it's made the experience of learning to code so much better for me. So I am also a member of the Wampanoag tribe, which resides in Massachusetts and Rhode Island primarily. I spent a big part of my life, we have a largely black tribe, and I spent a large part of my life really feeling kind of weird growing up in a black and native household. I didn't see any families like me out there. And for some reason, I felt like we didn't look like your stereotypical Native Americans. So there was that. There were so many ideas of what a Native person should be and should look like. But we have white Native folks too. And they all seem to be redheads for some reason. I love my tribe though. I really do. And we have a pretty tragic history, unfortunately. If you look up the history of King Philip's War, you'll see exactly what I mean. And we had to rebuild nearly from scratch after decades of abuse and massacre. And when you refuse to be colonized, we see, history has seen what happens. But free or escaped slaves actually is kind of the history, though, in short. Free and escaped slaves that were coming up from the South were really welcomed by the Wampanoag tribe because we had shared experiences in slavery, and also there were a lot of natives and black folks down south that had worked with the ships at that point in time. And so having those common skills really led to a lot of intermarrying. And so we have a huge Cape Verdean population within our tribe as well. And it's a really beautiful tribe. And of course, when you have to rebuild, I have like 8 million native cousins somewhere, everywhere spread out. It's actually funny. I had sent an invite out to somebody within the tribe to come and see me speak for my first conference talk. And this guy responded. He was like super fine. And I found out later his last name was actually Guy. And Guy is my grandmother's maiden name. So it's, that's our line. And so that's a no-go. That's pretty common within tribes, though, I think. And I am also on the autism spectrum, very outspoken about the topic of autism and my life as an autistic person. And I've done videos, I've worked with other women and people of color that are, that believe that they could be autistic to make sure that they have resources. I was diagnosed at 32, and that was after a life of confusion and frustration with virtually every aspect of my existence. Autism and nonverbal learning disabilities, which I also have, are commonly present in tandem. And it presents me really with two major challenges, which is an important setup to what I'm talking about today. It made it very difficult to be able to contextualize those more abstract concepts, a lot of math and sciences, often computer science concepts. And it also affected my ability to communicate effectively with others without preparation and or context for the situation. But I've overcome a lot of this just by being here, one way or the other, taking risks and being brave. And I became a conference speaker really largely to overcome a lot of those, what most would perceive to be limitations, but I no longer really consider them that. And people respond well to it. They respond well to my sharing of my experience, and it gives me greater confidence in doing so. So it really becomes, I build momentum with sharing. And I'm really finding my stride in my 30s, finally understanding myself. And if you have any questions, especially as Native people, about the autistic experience, or if you suspect there might be something up, I haven't created but what I've created, but there are a lot of other resources out there from people. And, I would be happy to pass them along to you if you are interested. A really big part of my story is that I'm a computer science degree dropout. When I was at Wellesley, I had a high school boyfriend, and at the time he had chosen to go into a computer science major right after he got to WPI, where he was, Worcester Polytech. And I had no idea what computer science was really. I knew more about instructional technology, kind of, which I focused on more. Also, information technology, working, in with hardware and what have you. But I hadn't really given a whole lot of thought to the programming and the actual computing behind the abstract, you know, context of like IT and what have you. But I followed suit because it sounded really interesting to me. And, I got through my 101 courses at Wellesley, but then things started to fall apart. It was CS 230 actually that killed me, and that was data structures and algorithms. And I've heard that referred to as a major weed out course for people, which there should never be weed out courses for anything ever, but it exists. I got my first D ever when I was trying to meet the requirements for the degree in calculus, another huge stopping point for a lot of people, an obstacle that they can't get over. And CS 230 was approaching a D when finally I was in a meeting with my major advisor, a white man at a women's college, and he had really advised me that if I was struggling this much, it wasn't necessarily that maybe I wasn't a good fit for this, but that, I should take that as a cue, to not make things so difficult for myself. And so I took that cue. I jumped on it and I switched majors, and I really regret it, but live life without regrets. It happens. But I listened to him. I switched to political science, and I really didn't look back until later. But I'd graduated actually in 2007 into the recession. So after years of deferred student loans and temp jobs, it was a mess. I don't know if anybody here went through that, but it was absolute misery. And, temp jobs, and then finally I landed a permanent one, and it was in customer service. I had kind of built up a career out of customer service, even though I did not want that at this point. But I was happy to find work, period. It was a sign that things were getting better. But quite frankly, the job sucked. I am very much about automation and making things better for my life. It was a really old maritime company, and they were often barking at me because I was trying to add automation to their processes so that I wasn't doing as much work myself. It all fell on me. And they would get upset that I would spend so much time working on the automation and not actually working on, you know, the difficult of doing it over and over and over. So I'm like, oh, okay, you're picking on me for not wasting time. Cool. But after that, I have moved on to a tech company, my first tech company, that dealt with iPad POS systems, and it was like a breath of fresh air in terms of the tech. Sometimes I would get answers on my questions about programming and what have you, and but it didn't last forever either. I was canned in 2015 because I'm too ethical, apparently. I started teaching myself to code after, though. It was a mess, but I got through it, and I wasn't sure what the hell to do. But I had seen these ads floating around while I was living in Portland there at the time for a company called Treehouse. And Treehouse was supposed to guide you toward, and through the skills required to build websites. And I didn't know anything more than just building websites. I had kind of fiddled around in MySpace and GeoCities before, but apart from that, it had been ages. Like days of only inline CSS, really no external sheets, nothing. And I hadn't even learned that much. It was copy paste stuff. But you know what? I took the plunge. I took the plunge and I worked my ass off learning how to code and developing the skills after that. And yeah, I had a fucking blast. I had a blast learning for the first time in my life. It had been such a challenge up to that point. I felt like I was finally able to learn at my own pace and the way that I needed to, and apart from an academic environment. And, but again, I hit the wall when I came to data structures and algorithms. It didn't even have to be concretely defined as a course. It just comes up. Naturally, it's going to happen. And I literally remember I was searching for like trouble solving code challenges or something. So I was getting blank screen paralysis really badly. And I started to come across this concept of programmatic problem solving. And it just made sense as really a root of my challenge learning to code originally in college, because I just didn't understand how to get from point A to point B. But while I was working through that, really, the increased confidence that I was building from learning this way caught the attention of an employer. And after 10 months, I got my first job in web development. And I was a full stack developer, even though I had no clue what I was doing. But it was learning opportunities, and it was developer money, quite frankly, which we all need. We need that money coming in, right? But it was just a tiny little shop on Cape Cod in Massachusetts, with three guys and a dog. Did not care. Like I said, good money. And I was officially a developer, right? A career developer. And after a while, I realized I had to leave that job for my family. But I realized I didn't want to work a 9 to 5 any longer. And I tried freelancing briefly after that, did not like being at the whims of my clients. And so what's left? I really bounced around the idea of becoming an entrepreneur before I settled on it. I don't think it was that long. It didn't take me long to actually make that decision. And I was working for myself, and I wanted to build something really beautiful that I could share that would help the self-taught students that I had been working with, who were like I was. So I am here speaking to you today, in part because I work in the tech industry itself, which a lot of us do, and I'm meant to be here. But on a larger scale, I'm here because Indigenous people are the original engineers. We have learned the ways of the earth, of sustainable practices, and more importantly, we've solved the world's problems without having to make them ourselves. And we are the original problem solvers, and we did a very good job of it. Those are my uncles up in this picture, by the way, Harry Hawk and Lee Braveheart Edmonds. They're my grandmother's brothers, and they're literally everywhere in our tribal affairs. I think if you Google Wampanoag tribe, they'll be within the images on the first page, and they're cute. They're really cute. And yet, everybody, despite being the original engineers, we represent less than 0.8% of the tech industry. Let that sit in. And this is according to Stack Overflow's 2021 survey. Out of nearly 80,000 respondents, only 0.72%, less than 1% of survey respondents self-identified as Indigenous or Native American. This is insane. It's obviously incredibly unacceptable. Our numbers have gone down over the years, and there wasn't even an option for Native American pre like 2016. I had actually gone back year and year and seen it just gets more dismal. And I also want to point out here that prefer not to say in your own words, and I don't know, have higher percentages than the self-identified Native Americans in our presence in the industry. What the fuck's going on here? Can somebody explain this to me? There's obviously, like I said, just a huge problem here. And there are lots of ways to address it, though. We shouldn't have to, but we do. And one way is screaming at colonizers and kicking and, yelling so that we're even being noticed in this industry. Another is focusing on our Native people, on our tribes, on our youth in particular, and our career changers, also those who want more, for their careers, and ensuring that they have what they need to be able to successfully enter and stay in the tech industry in whatever field they choose. STEM is going to be our power to be able to get those numbers up. And I feel like many do a charge to do both. It's I yell and scream and I kick, and I encourage you to do the same. Yell and scream and kick right beside me, because we won't get what we need otherwise. Closed mouths do not get fed. But I've worked for several years with young members of the Wampanoag tribe to ensure they have what they need to be and to stay and to pursue an education in the STEM industries. But apart from getting those resources, one area of concern to me is even getting those early coders the fundamental skills that they need to even write code, like pre-Udemy courses and all that stuff. The skills that they can't learn in school, and because they're not even offered. And programmatic problem solving is one of them. So anyway, that's a little bit about me, or a lot about me. And that could really be a talk in and of itself, but I do feel like my story, and I've been told my story is pretty powerful as far as how I got to where I am. So I hope it inspires somebody out there too, because it's been a hell of a ride, but I wouldn't change a thing, honestly. Even with the CS dropout part, it wouldn't have brought me to where I am today, and I appreciate where I am today. But on to my talk finally. We're going to be covering today why exactly those code challenges that I talked about that I got hung up with can be so daunting for people who are new to coding, how problem solving, algorithms, and code challenges, there's so much right there, how they're connected and how they're related and different from each other. Also, some really important mindset tweaks that you can use and you can apply today that are going to help you to see the entire process of problem solving and to see it differently in kind of a new perspective. And then we're going to go through really quick how to create a rock solid plan that will allow you to actually come up with a plan before you start writing your code, which is where most of problem solving resides. And just to highlight the hardest part of code challenges and why that is. And along the way, if you have any questions, you can just drop them in the comments and I will make sure that I get to them. Or I'll try and weave them in and address them at some point, after the Q&A in the actual, in the talk. So let's jump in. So what is programmatic problem solving? Programmatic problem solving is the process of building a solution using logic to plan your approach that takes you from your input to your expected output. And we're required to build those programmatic problem solving skills really early in our self-education and academic education, whichever route you go, often in the form of solving code challenges. You can't avoid them. If you want to interview for a company, you're going to face code challenges. So you really can't escape it, and I certainly could have. And we're challenged to build those solutions, and we need to know how to get from point A to point B. And most of this process happens actually before we even write our first lines of code. And some people fight that. They don't need to do it. They feel like they can dive right in. Maybe you can, and those are probably most likely people who have experience in these areas anyway. So you get practice and start to see those patterns that will help to save you a lot of time. But the young people and the new coders, what about them? We need some kind of step-by-step path for them to take to their solution to make sure they're doing it right. You can imagine it like cooking a dish. You need to know your ingredients, the recipe for cooking, and what the final dish looks or tastes like so that you know that you got it right. And if you're missing any one of those parts, good luck cooking. Maybe you can still make something good, like I said, but good luck. It's probably going to be a little stressful, and you're risking a lot there. And I mentioned before that Native Americans are excellent problem solvers, Native and Indigenous people, incredible problem solvers. But solving life's everyday problems is very different from programmatic thinking. Programmatic thinking is much more logical. It's logical in nature, and it follows specific sets of rules that will guide you from your input to your output. We use logic statements and conditional evaluations to determine what happens at every step of that trip, that voyage from point A to point B. And that's not terribly different from real life problem solving, but it is far more rigid. Like I said, there's really no, real life gives us a lot of gray area, but in computing and programmatic thinking, there is no gray area. Something either is or it isn't. We see a lot of true and false. And one of the challenges with programmatic thinking and with programs in general is that it's very abstract. And remember, I said that's one of the things that I really wrestle with. And that means that it's buried under the hood, like the mechanical parts of a car. There's a lot of moving parts, but you can't see any of them. You just know that the end result is working. And that was really what tripped me up, because I'm a highly visual, auditory, tactile person. And code felt more textual to me until I developed my own mental models for creating things with it. Programmatic problem solving really works based on the way that computers work. Very logically, they accept input and they output. Every step is logical, and we know that coding works off of true and false often, but it also, at a more abstract level, it works on and off. And being able to evaluate on and off is the basis of virtually everything programming. One of the big things that I hear with my own students from survey responses, everything, is that new coders don't know how problem solving really differs from an algorithm or a code challenge. All these terms are kind of everywhere. So in short, problem solving is your process of determining your approach to a problem in order to arrive to a solution. Algorithms are sets of instructions written by coders to make computers accomplish a task, so like our recipe. And code challenges are challenges posed to coders that require them to build an approach and then write the appropriate algorithms to produce expected output. So you can see where they're all interconnected there. But I'll relate them a bit more fluidly even. First, we're given a code challenge. We need to create a solution, and in order to do that, we'll build a problem-solving approach. And we shine a light on the problem and ensure we're creating a solution that actually solves the problem. And then we write the specific algorithms in order to get that input and output in line to something that we expect, right? But this should get you seeing the process of problem solving and how everything interconnects a lot more smoothly. And I also have some tips here for you that I'm throwing in after, now that we've kind of gotten our baseline and definitions and everything else done for those three topics. But let's go into my first tip. And my first tip here is the bias of familiarity. So when you're doing your programmatic problem solving, the bias of familiarity is basically our tendency, our very human tendency, to start solving a problem by first tackling what we're most familiar with and what we're most confident doing versus kind of a top-down workflow. And this can affect you. It probably will during the approach planning and the coding phases where you can get let off your path very quickly by looking ahead at the next steps because they're familiar. Probably a newbie level person, relatable experience, will see, you'll know exactly what this means. You see something and you latch onto it because you're familiar, you feel like that'll get you a look forward, but problems are going to have parts, first off, that you don't understand. In fact, they should, because that means they're at your right level. But try to solve as linearly as possible. You wouldn't write a book with chapters out of order, so why would you solve a problem that way? It's not, you'll know what it does as it tells a story. And if you get to a part that you're not familiar with, just stop and understand that that is completely normal. The best way to see our code is like that story, so let that kind of calm you and take over. But here's the thing about the bias of familiarity is that it's nuanced, and you should also start with what you know. It does make us take inventory of what looks familiar to us and what doesn't in a program. But it doesn't mean that we have to take action on that familiarity right away. You can be mindful of it, but starting with what you know in this case really means that you consider the problem and you take note of what you know and don't know. And this will make it easier too to figure out what you don't know, because then you can focus on researching your approach on those parts. Bias has a negative connotation for a reason, though. We tend to avoid reason, and then we end up with an ill-devised solution and approach in favor of our current knowledge. So step 2, you need a written plan and one that actually solves the right problem. Not creating a plan is going to eventually, 100% certain, halt your problem solving process. Eventually it will happen. And planning is just good practice. And consider that any project in the workplace, for example, project managers handle it before even assigning it onto, piece by piece onto their team. And your plan should effectively take you from input to output. Again, that's our entire goal in a variety of cases. But how do we actually create that plan? I don't just want to say a plan. First, you need to read and understand the problem. I like to read it out loud because it can, process better in your synaptic connections. What are you being given? What's the expected output? And then I break down the problem into the smallest possible parts. This because I suck at it. I overcomplicate everything. And overcomplication is always overwhelm as well. I'm pretty sure by the way, that contributed to my CS failures. And it's still a big old challenge for me. But yeah, you want to break things down as small as possible, and then you're going to write your code as pseudocode, which means that you're writing it in plain English or whatever language you speak to, so that you can translate it directly to your actual programmatic language. Um, and plus, there's lots of documentation at that point, but getting to that, your language, going through step by step, is definitely going to be one of the hardest parts. And then you optimize, you tighten it up, you figure out what you can do better so that it is more efficient and effective. But then by the time you get to step 4, you haven't even written code yet, but you're halfway to your solution, more than halfway. So definitely very good advice there. Tip 3, coding is 80% problem solving and 20% actually writing code. Remind yourself of this regularly. Technology changes very quickly, problem solving does not. Tip number 5 is to divide and conquer, not trial and error. Within every problem, larger problem, lies many smaller problems, and they need to be solved too in order to get to your final solution. You'll need to be able to see those smaller problems within the bigger problem, and you'll be able to see the bigger picture, but hopefully not be overwhelmed by it. I have a lot of trouble with this too, because my brain always wants to see more complex, a bigger problem, and then I get terrified in turn. But really internalizing that big problems aren't as scary as they seem made a huge difference in my confidence level and how I approach code challenges and everyday debugging. So, in summary, beware the bias of familiarity. Work top down, like as if you were writing a story, and not just on those parts that you really feel confident with. Create an actual plan. Don't Leroy it, and bonus points if you get that reference. Don't run in without a plan at all, because you will inevitably crash and burn, especially if you're new. Remember that problem solving is the hardest part of solving code challenges, and 80% of it is actually doing the problem solving. Take the time to learn and understand those common design patterns and understand why they work. You will learn a lot in the process of just dissecting them and learning how they work. These tips will help you a lot while navigating through your code or navigating through your code education when you meet your code challenges, all of it. And hopefully you'll have a better overall understanding of what programmatic problem solving really is, why it's so damn important on top of that, and how you can build an actual plan to figure out what your approach is before you even start writing the code. And the end result of building those strong programmatic problem solving skills is that you should feel more confident overall, more calm in solving these problems, because you know that you always have a next step and it's very clear and concise and it works for solving any problem. And you won't get as frustrated either because of that fact that you have next steps at all times. And as far as our new native coders are concerned, learning those skills from the ground up, those fundamental problem solving skills, will help ensure that they build competency very quickly, which is going to be critical to establishing and competing in an industry that we have seen is increasingly not for us. So let's keep solving problems and keep building those numbers up. Thank you so much for having me at Natives in Tech. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your conference, and be sure to follow me on Twitter at LaviancCode. I'll definitely follow you back. Thanks so much, everyone.
Dagote community, Shi Lauren Denson Konse, Chi Chiende. Hi, my name is Lauren Denson. I'm Warm Springs Apache, and today I'm going to be sharing with you the art of storytelling with burps and farts. NASA JPL is all about acronyms, and this is a way that we tend to develop projects or come up with tools to remember handy things like these applications that allow us to practice presenting and strategies for clear communication. It will take you beyond the stars, and clear communication to be able to stand out and share your voice is definitely the indigenous way. So today I'll tell you a little bit about myself, my role, at NASA JPL and go into these applications, burps and farts. Hey, so I'm a member of the Chinande Nation of New Mexico, Warm Springs Apache. I have a background in computer engineering and computer science with a combination degree for my undergrad from the University of Southern California. I was a transfer student and living in the Southern California area in the desert. I went to Riverside Community College and then transferred to USC. I am a lifelong learner. I love math and science, teaching, mentoring, of course, cooking, Halloween, science fiction, comic books, and making art, you name it. In school, I wanted to be an Imagineer and work for Disney. And I did that. I went and pursued an internship to learn about Imagineering, to bring art, creativity, and math together, which took me eventually to the path of NASA JPL, which I'm able to infuse great collaborative creativity every day. I'm currently a co-chair for JPL's Native Affinity Group Nebula, Native Engagement in Building a Unified Leadership Alliance, Nebula. Again, another acronym. I've been at JPL about 7 years, and right now I'm learning new platforms and languages for data analytics, as well as learning Apache. That's a little bit about me. So at JPL, our unofficial motto is to dare mighty things. JPL is one of the NASA centers. We're located in sunny Pasadena. And at JPL, our core capability is to integrate science, engineering, and technology that provides end-to-end implementation of space missions through either the use of in-house experienced workforce or in collaboration with industry and academia. And so the Perseverance rover that you see, Mars 2020, is an exact example of that. We built a majority of our car-sized rover on site, but in collaboration with different companies to bring components together, like the wheels and the cameras and you name it, our new science instruments, and come together to build these spacecraft. Some quick highlights: we've explored all the solar system's planets from Mercury to Neptune and beyond. We've designed, built, and operated all 4 of the successful rovers that we've sent to the surface of Mars. The next landing was on February 18th, successful, with our 7 minutes of terror. Check out links for that later. And JPL has about 6,000 employees on our 177-acre facility, which is in the foothills of Los Angeles in the San Gabriel Mountains, just north of Pasadena. That's about the size of Disneyland and California Adventure combined if you've been to those parks. So it's like a college campus, has a college campus feel. You'll see folks walking around, flip-flops, t-shirts, you name it. It's a creative campus and a campus feel. And so what I do in particular, I work for the Office of Safety and Mission Success under Mission Assurance. I'm currently a manager, a supervisor for a team called Training Tools, Technology, and Tracking under the Quality Assurance umbrella. And I ensure that JPL products work when they're needed millions of miles away. So what does that mean? When we're building our space flight hardware, we get one shot, and it's make it or break it situation. So we want to make sure we do everything we can to ensure that everything works while it's on the ground, because we can't just send somebody up to go and investigate and fix it, especially when it's on another planet like Mars. So we're often paving the way for new technologies and techniques to explore and collect science for the future, for future missions, just like returning to Mars. So in order to be successful, we've got to collaborate with a variety of folks with differing skills, communication styles, and backgrounds, so that we're able to come together to solve critical issues while also understanding differing points and opinions. And diversity, equity, and inclusion is an active and ongoing initiative at JPL, where we're often working, again, with folks across the world to be able to bring our spacecraft essentially to life. And on the right here, you see an image of our Perseverance rover in the high bay with folks that could be a combination of engineering, quality assurance, planetary protection folks wearing bunny suits to protect the hardware. And so you can see this is just an example of our clean room and engineers performing a test of our driving capability. And you just can see this light obstacle course. And so where do burps come into play? Burps are briefing improvements through role. Are conveyed. But potentially, most importantly, they can quiz you on questions that you potentially might get that you probably haven't thought of or weren't necessarily prepared to provide. And don't forget to have fun. We do this often, constantly. We like to burp our interns. We like to burp each other all the time. Whether it's in management reviews, it could be critical design reviews. Just again, to make sure you have your point across. You could also take this opportunity to ensure that your presentation graphics aren't too much or your use of color is effective. As an example, I have an individual in my team who's colorblind. And so having a perspective from him is able to provide, well, what do those colors mean? Are those supposed to be effective? And so this is a technique that you can use basically in any opportunity to provide a presentation, interview, writing a proposal, providing an investigation results. Again, this is to give you practice timing, and so that when the big day comes where you have to provide your briefing, you're burped and burped well. So farts. Farts is another technique that we often use, I would say, in quality assurance, where something happens. And this can happen with an unhappy customer. This could happen with an accusation. It happens. In the workplace, we've had incidents where maybe an escape occurred or a mistake happened. How do we address this? So in the case of being confronted by someone who's upset or angry, we fart. So the first thing, we pull out the arrows and don't immediately attack back. When thinking about your customer or folks you're collaborating or interfacing with, people are important, and it's easy to get passionate and it's easy to get upset, but take a step back. Let them know, we'll look into the issue, take a breath, take a moment, and then go and do the homework. Check your facts. You'll want to find out what is true and what is not true. Often, and I would say, especially in this day and age, it's easy to jump to the first conclusion. You don't want to do that. Be thorough. Understand what exactly happened. Some techniques you could do with that is develop a timeline, or we use an internal tool called a cause network, where you want to define what the necessary and sufficient steps to take to an incident occurred. And so again, we do this often for investigative techniques. Once you collect all your facts, You know what happened. You respond respectfully. Again, tie it back to the facts. In some instances, folks take things personal, and it's not about attacking, it's understanding what occurred. If necessary, apologize. Tell them how the situation will be remedied or has been remedied. And if you're at fault, make sure it won't happen again. Be humble. The T, take care of our house. What that means is if there was, in fact, an issue that happened on our side, you made a mistake. Again, nobody's perfect, but go back and take care of it. Don't sweep it under the rug. And then smile. A smile never fails to help communication go better. And it's interesting, if you didn't know, smiling gives an impression that you're smart, makes you feel better, and it really makes an impact of a professional way of responding to issues that could happen. And again, this is just a technique that tends to happen in quality assurance, where we are supporting all the flight projects, and we have folks, and we are somewhat the last gate in double checking that work has happened or something wasn't missed. And so we want to establish and maintain our partners and relationships with farts. So again, why is this important? You want to use burps and farts in combination with each other. Again, being an engineer, self, embrace who you are, build confidence in you, and your personality will shine. Those come through in being your authentic and genuine self, and that is important, especially in your Indigenous way. Use it. Use your power, warrior up, and be that confident person in your presentation. Whether again you're communicating with folks, you're sharing a proposal, you're looking for funding, convey the story um, that brings people in rather than pushes them away. And that's with being who you are, your colorful self. And so I just wanted to share a few extra links. Perseverance landing had occurred on NASA TV. We have all kinds of links that you're able to find out more about NASA JPL through YouTube. We often have landing interactions. There's several mission homepages that you can check out. Perseverance and Ingenuity is just one of the applications at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. We have various missions that are either around Earth or we're going to Europa and landing on asteroids with Psyche. curious about different careers at JPL, check out our web pages. If you're interested in particular about learning how to code, and I kind of didn't talk about that. Conference that NASA and the agency typically attends. We try to provide networking opportunities there and resources for the general community. And so with that, again, Ihehe, thank you for your time. I look forward to hearing your questions and contacting me. Don't forget to check out our Perseverance rover and the exciting science that we've been able to accomplish with our bit carousel searching for bacteria on Mars and being able to fly remote our little helicopter Ingenuity drone on the surface of Mars, with more to come and Mars sample return coming soon. So again, Ihehe, thank you for your time. Have a good day.
All right, thank you so much for joining the session. Today we're going to be talking about career switching into tech. And before we begin, quick introduction for myself. So hi everyone, my name is Natalie. I'm a current program manager for the Adobe Digital Academy. It is a two-part program that involves scholarship tuition and an apprenticeship program. But I'm also a former Hack the Hood and Tech SF alum. I'll talk a little bit about that in my journey. To cover a brief agenda of our talk, we're going to start with an introduction and just covering what our goals are for the session. We'll follow that by quick story time and then really just draw connections between the conversation that we're going to be having. Lastly, thinking about what the pathways for a career switch into tech are and actually creating a plan for yourself. And then we'll finish off with just kind of a debrief on the representation and actual natives that are in tech. So to give you a bit more background about me, my area of interest spans between creativity, education, and innovation. Where I'm based, actually, I'm currently in occupied and unceded Ohlone territory in Yalamo, which is also known as San Francisco, California. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute here. As I mentioned, former Hack the Hood alum, participate in programs through Tech SF, also Bay Area Video Coalition, and different programming, including through the Caper Center, Impact Hub, and then a couple hackathons as well, including one that was hosted at Netflix a couple years back by some really good colleagues of mine. So we're in the spaces, we're out here. Again, I'll put a quick plug for the Digital Academy Scholarship Program. The apps are actually open till the 12th. So I'll include a link tree later down in the presentation that you can check that out. But I just want to mention it here for anybody that might find that as an opportunity for yourself. And then some of my interests are, it's pretty diverse, but it ranges anywhere from art, dance, cultural based media practices and photography, digital storytelling, videography, herbalism, and yeah, that kind of comes through in my work as well. So to move along, I also want to mention that I'm a current Natives in Tech member, a contributor, and I'm also a board member. So I serve on the board for NIT. And I wanted to show just a quick screenshot of the landing page for Natives in Tech. So make sure that you go through and check that out. Also, I want to plug the YouTube channel that actually has access to the recordings for the different meetups that have happened over the last couple of months, in addition to recorded sessions from previous NIT conference speakers. And I'll also add, there's one that I shared on non-traditional pathways into tech. And then the other one was on Indigenous perspectives and innovation. But you can go and check those out on your own time. I want to let you know that they're there, they exist. So take advantage of the great information in those resources. All right, so what are we here to talk about? So we're here to talk about natives in tech and the intersections of that and creativity. And so I wanted to start off with a full circle moment. I was scrolling through my social media feeds and I actually saw one of my friends here, Randy, who was featured through Adobe Max in one of the highlights. And they were doing kind of an art walk through Navajo Nation. They featured other places in the world, other countries. And I just thought it was like a really great moment to see somebody that I know, somebody that's in the community being highlighted by such a big, digital media company. It's very validating to see that. And it actually drew more connections for myself on like, wow, I know this person on an individual level, and now the rest of the world gets to get a glimpse into the worlds and the perspectives here. So if you get a chance, they actually uploaded most of the sessions through Adobe Max, so you can find it through their website, Adobe Max, and highly recommend checking that out. Also, with the skills that I've been able to acquire over time, this is actually a mock-up website of a friend, artist, creative, musician, Dio, that, just really thinking about, I never thought that learning to make websites through Hack the Hood would allow me to make connections with community and creators in the space. And so it was really great to combine those technological skills with supporting and facilitating artists, culture creators, culture bearers to continue the work that they're doing, and seeing how I could support them and then simultaneously be supported by them. So I just wanted to mention that. In addition to our other friend here, who is also a musician, and we worked in different capacities, but just like really wanting to highlight that there's so many creatives out here doing amazing work, and that having access to these digital skill sets is essential for the continuation of the projects at hand. And I wanted to plug this video here that I worked on with my friend Chotima, and it was through Adobe Premiere, which we actually did the final edits for. So these are different ways in which we're actually using the technologies to give visibility and voice to the project's ideas, the words of wisdom that we want to share with the world, and the little bits of ourselves. I went over to the slide. So for our goals of the conversation, what are we trying to do here? Why are we here? What is the main goal? When we think about this, ideally, we want folks to be here ready to learn about switching careers, We want you to gain insight on the process itself, because sometimes it can be really in the abstract. So we want to just give you concrete examples and how you can see yourself as a part of that. And overall, I think that it's different when somebody tells you to do something, but when you're inspired to do it, or you pick up on a story that pushes you and propels you into that creative mode for yourself, that's essentially the best case scenario. We just really are hoping to inspire everyone to see these opportunities as pathways for your own life that you can actually work towards and obtain, and make it seem like it's not so out of reach. So this is our goal. So how will we achieve this? Well, we'll do this by sharing new information. We want to give a broad perspective of what tech is, because there's a lot of stereotypes about tech in general, especially for a Native and Indigenous community. And we want individuals to get exposure to people in the field, what they're contributing, and again, inspiration. That's like our main goal here. And building connections with community, and overall developing a strategy. These are the ways that we're going to achieve this. Again, want you to know what options you have. Also learn about other natives in tech and consider this as an opportunity for yourself. So when we think about, we did the goals, how we'll do it, but why? I think the why is the most important thing. If you've heard about these pathways into tech, a lot of the applications actually for scholarships, this is actually one of the big questions for your apps is, why do you want to do the career switch? What is your why? And so if we think about it, at a glance, we know that it's less than 5% of the Native, Indigenous identified folks that are actually in technology right now. So what does that mean? Well, if we're looking at in the context of North America, because that's where I'm located, but in the context of North America, if it's less than 5% of individuals that are in these spaces, that means that as technology advances, that number may most likely only get smaller. And so this is a very critical point where as the gap widens, we have to see those as interjecting opportunities to further our own skill sets and see ourselves as seeing viable opportunities for us to advance also. And well, right off the bat, people will say, I can't go into tech because of XYZ. So I want to ask, what are the most common fears that people have about switching careers? They hear tech and they think coding or software programming or software engineering. And so some of the myths here are, oh, do I need to be good at math? Not necessarily. There's a lot of roles within technology that are working on the products themselves, and a lot of them that are tech adjacent that are working in different areas. Well, what if I need a CS degree or a college degree? There's a big rise in non-traditional pathways, apprenticeship programs, internships, and scholarships to get into these spaces. They're being created because folks are realizing that in order to supply the demand, we will have, and also to diversify the individuals working on these products, we're going to have to broaden the applicant pool, and there are actual real benefits to doing so. Another one is, well, if I choose this path, is it going to be too hard? In reality, I think that especially nowadays with having so many free resources online, this is totally feasible. And if you find the right networks and areas for the support, it's totally doable. So I want to ask everybody on this conversation call right now, like, what's holding you back? What are the things that come to mind when you're thinking and considering this for yourself? All right. As you're thinking about that, I'm gonna pause and we'll go into a little bit of story time because I want to kind of do a big picture overview and then we'll continue the conversation. So to give you, I mentioned that I'm based in San Francisco Bay Area. So actually my grandparents migrated here in what was called the Bracero movement. And they situated in the Mission District in San Francisco. My grandparents come from the states Durango, Mexico, as well as Michoacan and Jalisco. And I would say that in my upbringing, I was very close to my grandparents, and our family traditional values were always like family is first. And, you get to know and are aware of the different ways that community builds within your own family structure. And then I think that I always want to kind of like acknowledge that, because it has allowed for me to really see that as central, and then the way that I build relationship with others as well. And so during this time living in the Bay, you don't meet too many folks nowadays that are in the Bay Area and that have, been in the space for a certain amount of time. But overarching theme here is the idea of a lot of movement due to displacement. The affordability of the area is very challenging for especially working class families, and even more so with the big influx of big tech companies over the decades. So I want to also acknowledge that. And this also meant that I was working in server jobs at restaurants so that I could pay my bills and, make a living. But I came to a conclusion that when I would go in for the shifts, sometimes I would be serving for some of the CEOs of these startup companies. I think one time the CEO of Pinterest came into one of the restaurants I worked at. And it just was interesting to, approach the tables and kind of at some points hear some of the conversations that were happening of these developers and these deals being made. And I just thought it was so interesting that we were all in the same city, but on such different levels of, just like what we were working on. And so that was kind of a big motivator for me at the time. I was really considering like this space is going to increasingly be in demand. And so what do I need to do to be able to pivot and see myself as somebody that can, one, stay in the area, and two, see what opportunities within this big change there are for myself. And with that, I saw a lot of the, high rises being built, the cranes in the sky, and an increasing disparity of lack of access and resources for folks. Homelessness went up over the years. It's still something that we continue to see. And so at that time, I actually came across a listing for a boot camp through Hack the Hood, as I mentioned earlier. So I decided to apply for it, and I got to learn a lot about the introductory information about what technology is, what startup cultures were. They discussed the different tech companies, the different avenues that you could go through. You didn't have to go work for a company. You could take the entrepreneurial pathway. You could be a digital marketer. You could go into design. Whatever interests you had, they were able to kind of match you with the right mentors or the right information to at least for you to know that that was a space that you could thrive in. And so eventually I actually learned about the Digital Academy Scholarship that I mentioned earlier and applied. So I went to General Assembly for 3 months in San Francisco in downtown. That was a really big learning experience for me, and it wasn't easy. In fact, there were many times where I didn't know if I was actually in the right space, but with the proper support, I was able to push through. And after that, I interned at Adobe, and we'll get to that in a second. But I want to posit that throughout this whole process, at this time, I was also really leaning in heavily into understanding who I was, who I came from, who were the people before me, and really understanding this in the larger context of what did the perspectives that I come into tech with, what did it have to do with us moving into the future and thinking ahead of time. So I want to recognize that as a visitor, I connected really deeply with the history of the space that I was in, specifically in the San Francisco mission, being an extension of kind of that upward movement of colonization that happened, and very similar to the homelands where I came from. So recognizing the Ohlone relatives of this land and just the commonalities. In fact, this photograph here at the bottom is at one of the missions, I think is Mission Carmel. And I remember going there as a elementary school student and just kind of picking up onto the strange and kind of uncomfortable situation. But I put this photo here because I want to have it as a reminder that through all that destruction, through that theft and erasure, that we still are here and we're here to do really big things. So I wanted to share that. And it got me thinking about, if we're thinking about the last 20 years, the last 30 years, and how tech has advanced, what lies ahead for us? I think that we're at an influx point where it can go one way and we can go all the way that way, or we can combine it with a little bit of who we are and our perspectives and backgrounds. Okay, so as I mentioned, I got that scholarship for Adobe, right? And then I interned over the summer. And that was a big game changer for me because I was actually able to be in a space that I would probably never have had access to otherwise. And it was all about the connection of being a part of a cohort and knowing other professionals that had gone through a non-traditional pathway. So now I was part of this community that actually led me to be in a space with all this digital creativity, individuals working on really cool cutting edge media projects, and overall thinking that these things were so outside of myself and my own experience, but yet I was like actually in the buildings, walking around. Now, the only thing that I felt was missing was seeing other people like me. Which leads me to the next point. Seeing other natives in tech creates a huge sense of belonging. I say this because there are many things that will be challenging on a technical capacity, and the other half of that coin is actually feeling like you're being included or there's space being made for you in these environments. But I want to say as a tip, we can't go into spaces, especially not these kind of spaces, and expect for us to be able to sit at a table when the table is not even built. So something that I'm really stressing for individuals is knowing that we go and we make the space in the spaces that we enter, and we cannot expect them to exist already. That's part of the work that we bring into it. And with that, I want to just mention that through one of my dreams was to see if we could create an Indigenous community at Adobe, what would it look like? So we actually submitted a proposal for this a couple months back. And this week, in fact, on Monday, we launched the official Adobe Indigenous Employee Network. So I want to give you this example of the dream work that takes some time before to really implement, but with the right dedication and calling the right team members in, like we can do really big things. I'm not showing you the logos here because they're a surprise, but this is a process that we're going through for the brand logo design. So we get to incorporate a little bit of ourselves, and essentially the one that will be chosen will be alongside the other Adobe employee networks. Okay, so I want to transition to our third topic here on making connections. So thinking about science and the role of science over time in history, but seeing science as something that's super fundamental to Indigenous worldviews and community. Why do I say that? I have said it before, I'll say it again. Indigenous innovation is sometimes seen as something that is future forward, but in fact, our innovation has been there, and we've played a significant role in mathematics and physics, technology, art, food culture, textiles. We've innovated, we've bioengineered different types of fruits and plants. Like that on its own is just like a major, just something to be very cognizant of and always lean back on and remember. I think that sometimes we forget it's not by design, it's not by accident, it's definitely by design. And so my one of my really good colleague friends would always tell me, Natalie, we are descendants of greatness. And I think it's true. And so I'm sharing the slide here. It's from one of the Maya codices. And as you can see, there's a numeric code, there's programming happening within these texts, right? And we may not know the extent of them, but they're elaborate methods of communication that the people at that time were hoping we'd be able to come across in the future. And so I want to introduce this idea of calendars and time counting. And so the in Mesoamerica, the Tonalpoali were these essential time counts that were being annotated, and part of these sacred texts and that the knowledge keepers in the Americas were holding. But as you know, with contact in the conquest, they were also stolen and taken back to Europe, the ones that weren't burned. And there they were used to develop the basis for what we know now as the Gregorian calendar. So what's the relationship between Indigenous people and innovation? Well, if you remember, you've probably heard this before, but it is true. The Maya people introduced zero to the equation, and without zero, we don't get binary, which is a core concept in computing, binary code. And so seeing zero as the balance between positive and negative integers, and it's something that indigenous people introduced to this idea and this thought. That's huge. And also seeing it modeled in the architectural accomplishments through astronomy, through the understanding of time, space, the seasons changing, the harvest. That I think is like a really big, those were some of the original OG engineers. And so here I wanted to share these slides that, this was really dense and super important knowledge. And we only have been able to recover a portion that in fact actually aren't even in the American continents. They're in Europe in the libraries. Some of the pieces ended up in museums. Some of them ended up with private collectors. I know that some are in the Vatican, a couple other in Russia, Austria, Germany. And we asked, like, what are they doing over there? What would it be like if those texts would have never gone? What kind of advancements would we have been able to accomplish with them? And I wanted to just share a couple more images here on this idea of a time count. And so we see here the iconic Mexican calendric sun of the time count, that at which point it had incorporated the Maya and Toltec and Olmec understandings of the way that time moved. So we kind of went off there, but it's important because we want to know, how do we find a sense of belonging? And we saw that having the community spaces and the cultural spaces are essential for our goals here. And so here I'll shamelessly share this image of actually being able to visit this the sundial, right, in person, and it's massive. And I thought, wow. In fact, I learned that, I believe it was in the 70s, that this huge glyph was actually found as they were excavating the subterranean channels underneath Mexico City, which was also a big lake with interconnected floating garden beds called chinampas that actually had the staple diet foods of corn, beans, and squash. And there were so many people in the center area. So you really have to think about what's our legacy and the capacity to create on that massive scale. Okay, next point. We're going into representation, why it matters, and natives in tech. So as I mentioned, again, we have a small percentage of folks, but we are out here nonetheless. The numbers are pretty low, but we can work with that. We can work towards increasing that. And I found that over time, when we're thinking about the way we solve complex problems is actually what brings us together with that teamwork dynamic. And that also gives us a sense of belonging. So what are the reasons why our numbers are so low? At a glance, the digital literacy / digital divide is one of the reasons why a lot of Native Indigenous tech professionals are so few, is because from the get-go, those pathways are already being affected through access, in addition to education. So we have populations that don't even have access to modernized infrastructure, which includes the necessary things to participate in 21st century tech landscape, smartphone devices, viable computer laptops, Wi-Fi hotspots. Like in some areas, not just in the United States, but in the Americas and in the rest of the world, indigenous populations are the last to have viable access to these resources. Again, that's also due to the underfunding of and resources in these communities. It's related to the socioeconomics. So who are the individuals that actually get to make it to college or have college preparedness to apply? Thinking about the accessibility in that and housing. Also, where are the Native leaders in these tech spaces? I want to meet them, because if we are able to know about those individuals, those are huge growth points for ourselves, and we can also simultaneously support them in their efforts. And another interesting point that a colleague here mentioned was that there's a lack of companies that are also investing in native technologists, and that recruitment is pretty low for natives, especially at tribal tech colleges. We also want to mention that inclusion doesn't just go on a company-wide level. It also has to do with whether you feel welcome on the teams that you're being recruited to be on. So it's one thing to make it to the team, but will the team's culture be suited for you to be retained as talent there as well? Is another big question. I've heard this a lot too. Being somebody who, well, we're called considered digital natives as a generation, because we've kind of been in the space where we've had access to the technology for so long, actually for a while now. So some of the fears include having a capitalist approach to tech, is that it's very like, what are our numbers? What's the triple bottom line here? The other thing is that the fear that tech has been used as a way to continue mass overconsumption. And this ties into the degradation of Earth and finite resources. So I want to position the fact that a lot of technology has come out from this idea of Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley being built also with inherent colonial and capitalist perspectives. So what does it look like to create tech that is indigenous centered, right? If we think about the incentives, we really have the opportunity to revitalize our communities by providing access to resources. And this is the big point here, is that we're able to leverage tech to meet the needs that we have and then help others. So this falls into cultural survivance. Where we have the ability to use the platforms to create good. Some examples of this can be language revitalization, increase to capital, increase to economic resources. Big point here. If we don't do this, those roles go to other people who are not as invested in our community's ability to thrive and survive. So if we do this, we can funnel that information, the knowledge, the resources, and create pathways for the future generations as the gap widens, so that they don't have to struggle as hard. So what are the benefits of tech being indigenous led? And I think on a big overview is like, what are the challenges that we have to overcome, right? So we'll have to be adaptable and lean on each other, especially those that are already in the space. We have to develop a plan and do our research, not give up in the process, be curious, so be willing to have a growth mindset to always wanting to learn. Also recognizing that these challenges are, a lot of the time, they're very based in our psyche, so they're mental, and this idea of imposter syndrome comes into play. So knowing what are some good tactics to work with that. And honestly, at the end of the day, we just need to do what we know how to do best, which is to be innovative, be innovative natives. All right. So thinking about pathways and creating a plan. What are the pathways into tech? You don't have to be an engineer, but at a high overview, there are founders, people that start their own companies, they gain the skills, they start their own projects, they build their own companies. Those are the founders. The technologists, these can be the individuals that are in the job boardrooms, finding solutions to problems, developing code and programming, the designers, everybody that's within the capacity of that. And then the startups, they're also kind of in tandem with the founders, but startup culture is a very, it's like a long-term investment, and startups are known to develop and scale really quickly and crash and burn. So the startup culture is also kind of going into the risk and a gamble. However, I have learned and heard that folks that do go this avenue, the teams will be scrappy to start off, but they learn, individuals that go this route learn a lot along the way, and that can actually increase their skill set in the long term, so that they're able to navigate and pivot into many different career directions. And then the other big avenue here is for tech companies. So, and actually gonna pause the recording really quick. 1 second. Intermission. All right, y'all, we're back. I hope that you took the little moment to take a breather. So to finish off our presentation here, when we're thinking about representation, I mentioned tech companies, but I also want to do a plug for Native owned and led companies and organizations. So we have Anamiki, the based in Canada, digital agency, Indigenous led. Tehuki Media, a media org based out of New Zealand. Ingenuity, we got, creative, a digital artist in animation based here out of Turtle Island. So maybe you haven't heard of these folks, but go ahead and take a note so that you can check out the amazing work that they're doing. I mentioned this idea also of taking the learning into our own hands. So I want to also kind of mention that boot camps are a viable route for people that want to do the pathway career switch. Some of them here mentioned Coding Dojo, General Assembly, Hack Reactor, Holberton, Hack Bright Academy, the Flatiron School, New Camp, which actually has a partnership with Natives in Tech. So if you're interested, please look for that online. And then, as I mentioned also, the big tech companies, we'll just list them because some of these actually offer scholarship opportunities for you, among them LinkedIn, Airbnb, Slack, Microsoft, Facebook, Google, and Adobe. But there are many more. I know that Pinterest, Pandora, Twilio, they all are part of a network of apprenticeships that offer the non-traditional career switcher pathway into different roles ranging from software engineering, product management, user experience design, data science, and more. Also, I'll say really quickly, LinkedIn's an amazing resource. If you get the chance, I would highly recommend putting some alerts or code words like career switch, scholarship, apprenticeship, tech internship, coding bootcamp, non-traditional pathways, so that you can be alerted when those opportunities are there for you. And these are some examples of the landing pages when those programs go live. So create a calendar. If you know that apps are open, set up some time for yourself to say from this time to this time, I'll do my application, I'll do some practice interview runs. And we can also apply the test and do iterations of that. When we don't get the answer we want from them, we can repurpose some of that we've already created to apply to other programs too. And again, these are some examples of LinkedIn and how you'll be able to find these opportunities. Okay. So thinking about why you should also consider this path is that there's a huge increase in demand, so much so that there are more tech roles to be filled than there are individuals with the proper skills to fill those roles. So right now is the best time. That's why there's a lot of scholarship options. Also, if you do achieve this, you have access to higher paying opportunities, including meeting more people like you. So through employee network supports, and ultimately you get to have the accessibility to be a builder of innovation. Any idea that you have, you can build it. And I really like that aspect of innovation. So something to be mindful, we want to also be realistic of like, what are the expectations going through these pathways? Well, you'll want to have a support system. So whether that's having like your home situation on lock, connecting with the right people that have done a similar program, or finding like the right way to make sure that you're really ready for this is essential. Understanding that this is a time commitment, At the end of the day, this is you seeking a new opportunity, something you've never done before, and that there's going to be a learning curve with that. So understanding the time commitment of that, the ability to enable yourself to have a growth mindset. So not working from a limitation or deficit model, but rather, oh, I don't know something and I can grow into the space where I may not know it, but I'm willing to learn it. And what does it take for me to get there? And recognizing that the funnest part to all of this is that there's no one way to go into this space. There are multiple pathways into technology, and to be able to gain these skills. Also, you're not going to want to do this because sometimes it can be a little bit vulnerable to say, hey, I don't know what this is. I'm reaching some roadblocks here. Ask for help. Asking for help is probably the best thing you can do. And it's the hardest thing to do. But guarantee there will be people there to back you up and, even support you and motivate you to know that you can do it. And I'll pose here that the industry not only needs Indigenous perspectives, we also need to connect the opportunities and how we can create change within our communities, and build those solutions, build those ideas. All right, we're coming close to the end of our presentation here. So what are the next steps? I want you to think about identifying programs that you'd like to apply for. The other thing is thinking of local tech initiatives or nonprofits that you can be a part of or learn about programming they may offer so that they can be a referral if you do choose to apply to these lot bigger opportunities. The other thing is following up. So follow up with the contacts that you already know or reach out to somebody new that you think could be a great resource for you to get into the space. Research is big. So when are the info session dates? What are the apps asking for? Is there a website I can reference? Is there an alumni network that I can possibly reach out to some individuals through? What about interviews? What am I going to need to have ready for that? The other big part is actually completing the applications. And then again, the iteration of getting acceptances or getting rejections is part of the process. Don't give up. And create as many opportunities for yourself. Additionally, as I mentioned, take interviews for roles that people may reach out for you for. You might not know exactly if it's the right fit, but interviewing actually positions you to get the practice that you need so that when that role that you really are aiming for comes along, you can really ace that interview and create that opportunity for yourself. Lastly, I want to say this. At the end of the day, your skill set is great. It's amazing. We need it. We need you to have those skills. However, it's not about only what you know. It's a plus, but who you know and who knows that you know what you know is ultimately the defining factor of that next step opportunity for you. And I will end with a quote here that says, "I'm from the future where they know about everything we had to do to hold it down." I like this because we are the architects and that's the direction that we're moving in. So the more that we can share these ideas and band together in solidarity, I think the more amazing things that we can create. So I just want to thank you for your time. I know this was a quick run through and I'm really hoping that you'll stay in touch. If you have any questions or you want to talk opportunities, please hit me up. My email is natalie@nativesintech.org. And I'm really thankful for NIT for allowing me the space to connect with you all. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Sego sewa guego, yuguna guiselacion gyats, aquasasne, teknagale, unguhuene hasarawayansta. Hi everyone, I'm Monigar. I'm an XR, producer and founder of Monigar.com, based in Akwesasne, Ontario, and Akwesasne, New York. Our reservation has the borders of Ontario, Quebec, Canada, and New York State, USA over us. I self-identify as Ungwahumwe, while governments refer to me as Mohawk of Akwesasne and a St. Regis Indian. So as an XR producer and a multimedia artist, I work in augmented reality, virtual reality, 360 and 180 film production, spatial audio, AI, and IoT, Internet of Things. So I've worked over 30 years in the tech industries, usually as a lead software architect, a developer, and my career progressed from, I actually started out as a developer, and then I think they started calling me engineer, and then an architect, then a lead architect, and you know how that goes. And then even some of my last official jobs, as where I was an actual employee, the highest was a director, a technical director for mobile software projects that were going on all over North America. And in those, it was usually iOS and Android that I did. And I've always been a consultant. I'm usually working remote. And if I'm not working remote, before COVID, I was being flown all over North America to meet with various clients. Usually I was brought into meetings with decision makers and executives to talk about, the solutions I would suggest, how I would do it and why, and even like budgeting and planning, the stuff that isn't really in the software engineering, not in the code anyway. So I did this for over 30 years. And in recent years, my career has been transitioning, which that's something I love about the type of work that I do, is it's constantly transitioning, because I've never been the kind of person that can sit and wait for things to happen. I'm not really good at factory line work. If I'm doing the same thing all the time, it would probably drive me crazy. With one exception, I do beadwork. It's Mohawk Woodlands raised beadwork. I do that. Sometimes it is repetitive, but that's different than, say, if I was in the tech industry, debugging mobile apps every day for the rest of my life. That's my idea of hell, to be honest. But if on the flip side of that, because I do that work too, is if I'm going into a mobile app project, say iOS and Android, and there's a huge problem and I debug it, I prefer to document it, like how it happened, why, how we fix it, etc., and move on from that. Like, that's my idea of fun time. Because at the core of what I do is I love seeing people benefit from tech, especially when it's really complex issues. For example, Johnson Controls, there is IoT devices that blanket the planet. And one year, they were overheating. The batteries were overheating, catching on fire, and the IoT devices were not gathering or sending any data that was expected. So I was brought in to debug the problem, correct it, document it, teach others like how I did my process. And that was so much fun, you guys. I love, those are the kind of projects I love, because no one, I think because too, I'm a little bit rebellious. There's a rebellious side of me. No one can tell me how to do my job. And nobody at that time, because there was really smart people on that team, but they just, for whatever reason, they weren't able to figure it out. So I went in there with my wild feral ways, and it reminds me of like, finding parts for a res car and keep that running. That's how I approached this problem, because I knew it's an expensive problem for one, but I knew it was going to be expensive to figure this problem out and correct it. So like I had a board, I put all kinds of devices on it, mobile devices, all different kinds, all different operating systems, everything. Had them on there, installed the software, and had it where I could debug it, things like that. And I was watching everything. I caught a couple on fire. And what I was doing is I was blasting data back and forth from any device I could find, which, yeah, that's crazy. But anyways, that's what I was doing. And I figured out the problem within 4 weeks, actually. And long story short, actually, I'm going to describe it in this because this is something really interesting and valuable to know. The problem ended up being in the software that was built that the mobile devices were holding, and it would send the data back and forth, they had this one class where it was beautiful. It was written in a way that any university professor would be like, this is elegant, it's beautiful. But the problem ended up being, it wasn't giving any rest, no rest or break to those devices, the batteries. So what I did is I thought about it and I was like, you know what, maybe if I were to add in, which is kind of ugly and messy looking, if I add in some extra loops and, well, first off, put it all in a background process because that was even going on. So whatever. If I add in some loops to give that battery a rest, with the assumption that each loop is 1 second, and there's documentation you can look up, it'll tell you like what I just told you. So what I did is I put in these loops to give that battery a rest, even though we had to do a background process that's pretty intense. And it was a lot of different rests and a lot of different timings. So some of those, because the way I was, and I'm going like this because I can see the code in my mind. Anyways, so I timed out in a loop the break, give a rest to the battery, to the point where I caught a few on fire and I was like, oh, well, this isn't a long enough rest, where I got it to just the perfect time where all of the devices were so happy. And what was happening is I was giving the batteries a rest, but still keep that process running. And it ended up not only was nothing overheating anymore, but the data that was expected to be passed back and forth, it was all happening again. And no new equipment had to be purchased. Like the old equipment was fine with this. And that was so exciting to me, you guys. Like I don't know. I'll just say that was exciting. That's what I love about the kind of work that people like me do. And I tend to be really feral. It's very difficult for me to sit in an office or a cubicle. That's just not my thing. It is my idea of hell. So with that, it's like when you get to know yourself, your strengths, and how and where you thrive, it will help you be able to build really cool solutions that everyone can benefit from. Because that has been a challenge for me as gatekeepers and executives thinking about hiring me. Sometimes I get really scared to hire someone like me because I'm feral. Like I'm not the kind of person to sit in a cubicle and be puppeteered. It's just not, I'm not able to solve any problems that way. So I've been really lucky. I've had some pretty cool teams of people I get to work with. And I know that they put themselves in uncomfortable positions to hire me and work with me. And I really appreciate that. So here, this next slide is some of the tech that I'm using still today. Obviously, this tech has changed and evolved over the years since I got my first job in the 90s. And even, in the mid 70s when I was building Eliza chatbots to tell never-ending stories. But right now, the bulk of my time is spent in, not every week changes, but I'll say in the recent months, yeah, I'm in Android Studio, Unreal. I still go on Unity 3D actually more than Unreal Engine because I have to, a lot of my old work is made with Unity. A new thing to me right now though is content creation for TikTok. I'm building some effects for that. I'm doing augmented reality effects for Instagram. So I use it's called Spark AR Studio. That's interesting. It's called visual programming. That's interesting to me because I didn't learn software engineering or programming in a visual way. I had to, even though I think about it in a visual way for sure, Spark AR and actually all of the new stuff coming out, like they have these visual programming way. That's really interesting to me and exciting because again, it's like future generations can build on top of what older people built for them. And I shouldn't even say older people, what the people before them built, because there's a lot of incredibly talented, fast, young people working in the tech industry. So my next slide, I'm just showing some more of the tech stack that I use, which is, I think, did I mention it? So Steam VR, Steamworks. I have Gakwa Dene VR is in there, and that's a VR environment that you can fly around, and you fly into a flower and you will hear how that color is spoken in the language we speak here in Akwesasne, which is Ganygeha. And if you actually start using your own voice to repeat what you hear, there's this little thing in the corner of the garden. It will start changing to the color that you speak in Ganygeha. And that is, for any of you that know about the technical challenges with low resource languages, we have no speech engines for Ganygeha. These computers actually, none of them support Ganygeha. So I figured out ways to use the speech engines that are already installed on whatever device and make that pronounce our language. Fun times. It's can get complex and crazy. The next slide. Why do I work in tech industries? Yes, it's usually the same throughout my whole career. But I will say my first gig did bring me in the 1990s, my first job where I got hired as an employee. It brought me from below poverty level, like really bad stuff, to six-figure income for my first year. That was wild to me, absolutely wild. And my life's been different ever since then. And I'll go into, actually, there is a few links on this slide I would like to show if possible. It just shows more about the why I do what I do, because today I like putting an audience in 3D and virtual reality environments where no one has to explain in English what they're looking at or experiencing. The people get to experience it and know that they're respected. Like no one's gonna, do anything crazy to them or disrespectful to them. So even while they're in spaces that are not English or Spanish or French, you don't need to know Ganygeha to go into these experiences and enjoy yourself. And the enjoyment is if you don't know the language and culture and you're just looking at the visuals, what I've noticed is people that don't even have an interest in the culture here, they do actually get an interest in it because they're wondering what are they looking at, which has been interesting to see. These links on this slide will show you some of the videos, so you don't have to put on a VR device if you don't want to see what some of that is. There's also, if you ever visit the Akwesasne Indian Reservation, there is a cultural center where they have a couple of virtual reality experiences I created for them. And one puts you, that was many, many years ago, but it's still there. I built it for the Oculus Go, the first device they had. And it's Longhouse VR, and that was so much fun to build. I got a guy with a drone, and the museum in Albany, they have this beautiful setup with a longhouse, all kinds of stuff. I got them to allow my guy with a drone to fly his drone through that whole thing in the museum. And we have 360 video of, oh my gosh, it's so hard to describe in English. You'd have to experience it. But I did that, and then I for that one, because my graphic design skills were not really like they are today, so I hired a graphic designer who actually recently got hired. She works on some AAA games now, and that's on my website. But anyways, I shared with her some baskets, pictures of baskets that are very significant to the culture here, sweetgrass baskets. And she built this 3D basket, a sweetgrass basket. And what I did is I made it so big in VR that you sit in this basket in the middle of the sky world. And the stars are the Pleiades, which is significant for that time of the year in January. The Pleiades are just above you, and it's just really peaceful and beautiful. And I think that's like, a lot of the VR stuff that I build and the AR, there's a contrast. It goes from peaceful and calm to that really the hyper way that I process the world with techno and lots of dancing and just wild stuff. I just yeah, it's a stark contrast from each other. But that one, Longhouse VR, is very peaceful. I think people should just see it, but it's because it is hard to describe in English. How do I produce XR? First, I do the best with whatever I have to work with. If documentation doesn't exist for us to learn really fast for prototyping or even a complete project, I experiment, I prototype, and I make my own documentation. And I enjoy that process because it's hard to say. You never know what the process is going to be sometimes. Sometimes it means me Velcro taping a bunch of different mobile devices onto a big giant board and running around a city and seeing how many IoT devices are out there that I can send data back and forth to. Other times it means I'm sitting in solitary confinement for a week or two and building something in Xcode. So it really does come down to like what I learned in our culture about just doing the best I can with what I have to work with. The other cool thing too is, you know, the amazing internet. I'm always in those places, Reddit, you know, all those places. And the one thing I do though that is a little bit where people are sometimes shocked, but those of us work in the tech industry, this won't shock you. I have profiles where I just look like a generic white teenage male. And I found that's the best way for me to keep the conversation on the technology, especially when I have questions about, you know, just even simple things like syntax or something, I don't know, or the SDKs. I found that's been sometimes, and I apologize in advance if this offends anyone, but I found sometimes that's the only way I can get through to do my work in a way that most non-natives get to benefit from, in that they can communicate, they can go on the internet and ask a question about C programming language and get a response, and it's respectful and it has nothing to do with, say, their gender, their race or anything. Because I found when I ask these questions as me, with my English name or even with my artist name now, because more people are getting to see what I look like as Monigar. I found when I ask questions, as you see today, I found the conversation doesn't stay on, like, say, C programming language. It goes into these places that are where I don't feel safe. I'll say that. So that's how I do the work I do. And let's get back to tech. I don't like talking about the yucky stuff if I don't have to. So the next slide, Gonyageha. That is at the core of how I do everything today, especially. So every project I'm involved in right now has to do with Gonyageha revival and retention. One of the websites where you can see a lot of my current work, it's not always current actually, there's always something going on behind the scenes. I expect some big updates probably in the next 2 months to mohawklanguage.ca. That's where I tend to put my recent work in regards to VR and AR and 360, all that stuff. And right now, I'm actually working on an XR web series. And we have this 3D environment that I made using off-the-shelf stuff. So I did not have to do any software engineering or anything. The only thing I'm focused on is the actual content creation and the production, and also the distribution, actually. And for that, I'm mostly doing, so I have 3D characters that I designed that you could see on mohawklanguage.ca. And if you guys see my slides, you'll see some of them on there too. So I do the 3D character design, and I use DAZ Studio for that actually right now, although I'm getting more involved in Blender. I don't know how far I'll go with Blender though, because I don't have a goal to be known as amazing graphic designer, my goal is going to get hot revival and retention. So I don't know, we'll see where that goes. I actually do face scans and photogrammetry to design these characters too. I do motion capture to animate them. And I'm using, right now, I'm just using an iPhone for the motion capture, but we have a suit coming in soon. Yeah, and I have like a small film studio in Akwesasne that we use for this type of work. And then spatial audio. I really like how Unity 3D, I can just drop the audio files into the 3D environment, because I love when people can move around an environment and spatial audio, like they know that audio is coming from, say, a specific character or a specific object. I really like that part of VR. But then I'm also doing augmented reality posters, where the posters, when anyone points a standard mobile device, Android or iOS, they can get an idea of maybe a little piece of this story, and links to the VR, but also the web XR, because this is available on a web page, so that people don't have to go into a VR device or even a mobile to see the content and hear the language, because that's the goal for everything, is hear that language, revive and retain it in a way that's respectful and friendly, and also especially that our protocols are acknowledged and followed. That is really huge, and also challenging, like, because it requires highly technical people, like, that aren't used to dealing with, say, the business logic as much, but also with political issues. And it takes them having to acknowledge the stuff that they don't usually have to deal with, or having, in my case right now, in more recent months, I've had to deal with that stuff myself personally. And that's why I'm hoping that all these grant proposals I'm doing, that something comes through so that I can support a team of Indigenous engineers and developers and designers. So next slide, that's all about my XR web series I started talking about. These two characters on here, the one on the right with the red hair, I did actually do a 3D scan of my own face and then use DAZ Studio, the default textures that they have. Like, if you've never used DAZ Studio, and you're interested in this kind of stuff, you should check it out. It's fast, easier. It's not totally easy if you're not used to that kind of interface, but it is a fast way to get content created, designed, and produced, ready for like a final production, and to animate it without being an expert graphic designer. It's been a very interesting process to me, because that's what I do. Whatever problem or issue I'm trying to solve, I'm not loyal to one way of doing it. What I do is, my process is, I start looking out there, and the internet's a big thing, but also talking with people off the internet about, it really depends on the situation, about their expectations, if things have gone bad for them, or why they don't like something, because then that helps me find solutions that maybe weren't thought of before, while still being able to integrate things that I know will work and that I'm accustomed to, and I've built a lot of great solutions for in the past. But DAZ is one of those things where it's very unexpected for me, but this is in my life now as a pretty stable solution for what I'm dealing with as far as XR web series production. Because that can get wicked expensive if you're not careful. Just the business side and the politics, holy cow. And then you're looking at the tech costs with time, learning curves, the licensing, all that stuff. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, definitely talk with me, ask me some questions. I love talking about that too. And the next slide, yeah, I put some links to where you can find me on the internet. My name is Mani Gar, and I've used that name since the 90s. So you can find me on every social media platform, the the mainstream stuff, but even the obscure things that most people have never heard of, I'm usually on there. And I'm happy to talk tech with Indigenous people, especially when it's in regards to language revival. That is a priority for me right now because, how do I describe this? So my focus on my own community's language, dialect. We have 7 communities with 3 dialects, and actually more than 3 dialects. So, but what I'm getting at is there's a lot of people with low resource languages that are not getting any support. My focus is on my own language, but that does not mean I can't help someone that's dealing with another language family. I have a ton of experience developing, but also supporting low resource language projects, including the really, really painful stuff. And the reason why I'm mentioning it is I may be able to help people that are doing that work right now navigate some of that most painful stuff that you have to navigate with those kind of projects. I won't get into that. Could be like a whole day. That could be a whole day presentation, how to navigate that, because especially when it involves artificial intelligence, for me, I had to deal with a lot of non-native tech corporations that are huge with a lot of money, literally trying to destroy my work. And even me as a person, when they couldn't destroy my work. There's a lot of racism out there. That's the best way to describe it. And what I can say here that could be helpful is when you're working on those projects, if you find yourself dealing with that kind of stuff, or even where people hate technology and like it's a monster, always remember why you're doing it. Always remember like the strength and the healing in the language and the culture, and it will get you through that horrible stuff. And definitely collaborate with your local elders and fluent speakers. If they're showing anger or pain or anything, let them know it's valid. It's totally valid, and acknowledge it. It will help all of you. What I'm finding, it helps all of us get through that, those challenges that have been stopping us from being able to communicate with our own languages on any device anywhere. So we need to do that. There's no reason for us to allow, if we had the skills and the resources to support our language or build the solutions that can do it, I don't see any reason for us not to do it. And yes, I do understand that some people will be very scared and angry about that, but it's because we haven't dealt with that part of the issue yet. So we gotta deal with that. Do I have any more slides? So now it's Q&A. Ask me anything. Yeah, I look forward to everyone's questions, comments. There's so much to talk about with tech, you guys. Really, ask me anything. Okay, Onagiwahe, Nyawa Goa. See you guys later. Bye-bye.
It's been such an honor to be among such accomplished and courageous dream makers today. They've so generously shared their journeys and their knowledge with us, and I couldn't be more appreciative. I'd like to thank Natives in Tech and all the sponsors for bringing together such an incredible group of Indigenous technologists to remind us that the solutions to the issues that we face are already within us. In closing, remember that we are the dream that the old ones dreamed. We have come further than they had ever imagined, and we have reached beyond the stars. We are their science fiction, and every day we should strive to dream, to imagine, to create, and innovate, to do what is impossible, because we are so much more than something else. We're Indigenous. And I'd like to thank you all for being here today and sharing this time with us and supporting all of our speakers. It is so appreciated. And I hope to see you all here next year. Thank you.